Introduction of The Blue Bird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Karina Pereira. The Blue Bird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. To the teacher. The blue bird, inhabitant of the Pays Bleu, the fabulous blue country of our dreams, is an ancient symbol in the folklore of Lorraine and stands for happiness. One of the strongest pieces of imaginative writing for children that the past decade has produced, and one of the most delicate and beautiful of all times, is The Blue Bird by Maurice Maeterlinck, written as a play and very successfully produced on the stage. Georgette Leblanc, Madame Maurice Maeterlinck, has rendered this play in story form for children, under the title The Children's Blue Bird, and in this form it has now been carefully edited and arranged for schools. Maurice Maeterlinck was born in Ghent, Belgium, August 29, 1862. Although trained for the practice of the law and moderately successful in it, he very early became dissatisfied with the prospect of a career at the bar. In 1887, the young man moved to Paris and turned his attention to writing. Shortly after, at the death of his father, Maeterlinck returned to Belgium, where he has since resided most of the time. His career as an author practically began in 1889, when he published 2 plays. At this time he was quite unknown, except to a small circle, but soon, because of his remarkable originality, we find him being called the Belgian Shakespeare, and his reputation firmly established. Amidst his Belgian roses, he continued to work and dream, and upon his youthful dreams he built his plays. They are all shadowy, brief transcripts of emotion, and illustrate beautifully his unity of purpose, of mood, and of thought. Whether in philosophy, drama, or poetry, Maeterlinck is exclusively occupied in revealing or indicating the mystery which lies only just out of sight beneath the ordinary life. In order to produce this effect of the mysterious, he aims at extreme simplicity of style and a very realistic symbolism. He allows life itself to astonish us by its strangeness, by its inexplicable elements. Many of his plays are really pathetic records of unseen emotions. Of all his writings, it is conceded that The Blue Bird makes the strongest appeal to children. Maeterlinck has always had much in common with the young. He has a child's mysticism and awe of the unknown, the same delight in mechanical inventions, the same gift of making believe. In The Blue Bird, Maeterlinck takes little account of external fact. All along he has kept the child's capacity for wonder. All along he has preserved youth's freshness of heart. He has, therefore, never lost the key which unlocks the sympathies of childhood. He still possesses the passport that makes him free of the kingdom of fairyland. The story of the Blue Bird may remind one somewhat of Hansel and Gretel, for here Maeterlinck, like Grimm, shows to us the adventures of 2 peasant children as they pass through regions of enchantment where they would be at the mercy of treacherous foes, but for the aid of a supernatural friend. But the originality, the charm, and the interest of The Blue Bird depend on the way in which the author, while adapting his language and his legends to the intelligence of youthful readers, manages to show them the wonders and romance of nature. He enlists among his characters a whole series of inanimate objects, such as bread, sugar, milk, light, water, fire, and trees, besides the cat, the dog, and other animals, investing them all with individuality, making, for instance, with characteristic bias, the dog the faithful friend of his boy and girl companions, and the cat the stealthy enemy. We may not understand these characters. We may not be informed whence they came or whither they moved. There is nothing concrete or circumstantial about them. Their life is intense and consistent, but it is wholly in a spiritual character. They are mysterious with the mystery of the movements of the soul. All through the story, we are led to feel that Maeterlinck's spirit is one of grave and disinterested attachment to the highest moral beauty, and his seriousness, his serenity, and his extreme originality impress even those who are bewildered by his graces and his mysticism. The Blue Bird will forever live among Maeterlinck's greatest works, and will linger long in the memory of all children, continuing throughout their lives to symbolize that ideal of ideals, true happiness, the happiness that comes from right-seeking. End of introduction. Recorded by Karina Pereira.
Chapter 1 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jenny Wallace. The Bluebird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matus. The Woodcutter's Cottage. Once upon a time, a woodcutter and his wife lived in their cottage on the edge of a large and ancient forest. They had 2 dear little children who met with a most wonderful adventure. But before telling you all about it, I must describe the children to you and let you know something of their character. For if they had not been so sweet and brave and plucky, the curious story which you are about to hear would never have happened at all. Tyltyl, that was our hero's name, was 10 years old, and Mytyl, his little sister, was only 6. Tyltyl was a fine, tall little fellow, stout and well set up, with curly black hair which was often in a tangle, for he was fond of a romp. He was a great favorite because of his smiling and good-tempered face and the bright look in his eyes. But best of all, he had the ways of a bold and fearless little man, which showed the noble qualities of his heart. When early in the morning he trotted along the forest road by the side of his daddy, Tyl the woodcutter, for all his shabby clothes he looked so proud and gallant that every beautiful thing on the earth and in the sky seemed to lie in wait for him to smile upon him as he passed. His little sister was very different, but looked ever so sweet and pretty in her long frock, which Mummy Tyl kept neatly patched for her. She was as fair as her brother was dark, and her large timid eyes were blue as the forget-me-nots in the fields. Anything was enough to frighten her, and she would cry at the least thing. But her little child soul already held the highest womanly qualities. She was loving and gentle, and so fondly devoted to her brother that rather than abandon him, she did not hesitate to undertake a long and dangerous journey in his company. What happened, and how our little hero and heroine went off into the world one night in search of happiness, that is the subject of my story. Daddy Tyl's cottage was the poorest of the countryside, and it seemed even more wretched because it stood opposite a splendid hall in which rich children lived. From the windows of the cottage you could see what went on inside the hall when the dining-room and drawing-rooms were lit up in the evening. And in the daytime you saw the little children playing on the terraces, in the gardens, and in the hothouses, which people came all the way from town to visit because they were always filled with the rarest flowers. Now one evening, which was not like other evenings, for it was Christmas Eve, Mummy Till put her little ones to bed and kissed them even more lovingly than usual. She felt a little sad because, owing to the stormy weather, Daddy Till was not able to go to work in the forest, and so she had no money to buy presents with which to fill Till-Till's and Mid-Till's stockings. The children soon fell asleep. Everything was still and silent, and not a sound was heard but the purring of the cat, the snoring of the dog, and the ticking of the great-grandfather's clock. But suddenly a light as bright as day crept through the shutters. The lamp upon the table lit again of itself, and the two children awoke, yawned, rubbed their eyes, stretched out their arms in bed, and Till-Till, in a cautious voice, called, "Mid-Till?" "Yes, Till-Till," was the answer. "Are you asleep?" "Are you?" "No," said Till-Till. "How can I be asleep when I am talking to you?" "I say, is this Christmas Day?" asked his sister. "Not yet, not till tomorrow. But Father Christmas won't bring us anything this year." "Why not?" "I heard Mummy say that she couldn't go to town to tell him, but he will come next year." "Is next year far off?" "A good long while," said the boy. "But he will come to the rich children tonight." "Really? Hullo!" cried Till-Till of a sudden. "Mummy's forgotten to put out the lamp. I've an idea." "What?" "Let's get up." "But we mustn't," said Mid-Till, who always remembered. "Why, there's no one about. Do you see the shutters? Oh, how bright they are!" "It's the lights of the party," said Till-Till. "What party?" "The rich children opposite. It's the Christmas tree. Let's open the shutters." "Can we?" asked Mid-Till timidly. "Of course we can. There's no one to stop us. Do you hear the music? Let us get up." The two children jumped out of bed, ran to the window, climbed on the stool in front of it, and threw back the shutters. A bright light filled the room, and the children looked out eagerly. "We can see everything," said Till-Till. "I can't," said poor little Mid-Till, who could hardly find room on the stool. "It's snowing," said Till-Till. "There are 2 carriages with 6 horses each." "There are 12 little boys getting out," said Mid-Till, who was doing her best to peep out of the window. "Don't be silly, they're little girls. They've got knickerbockers on. Oh, do be quiet, and look! What are those gold things there, hanging from the branches?" "Why, toys, to be sure," said Till-Till. "Swords, guns, soldiers, cannons. And what's that, all round the table?" "Cakes and fruit and cream tarts." "Oh, how pretty the children are!" cried Mid-Till, clapping her hands. "And how they're laughing and laughing!" answered Till-Till. "And the little ones dancing." "Yes, yes, let's dance too!" shouted Till-Till. And the two children began to stamp their feet for joy on the stool. "Oh, what fun!" said Mid-Till. "They're getting the cakes!" cried Till-Till. "They can touch them. They're eating, they're eating, they're eating. Oh, how lovely, how lovely!" Mid-Till began to count imaginary cakes. "I have 12." "And I 4 times 12, said Till-Till. "But I'll give you some." And our little friends, dancing, laughing, and shrieking with delight, rejoiced so prettily in the other children's happiness that they forgot their own poverty and want. They were soon to have their reward. Suddenly there came a loud knocking at the door. The startled children ceased their romp and dared not move a limb. Then the big wooden latch lifted of itself. With a loud creak, the door opened slowly, and in crept a little old woman, dressed all in green, with a red hood over her head. She was hump-backed and lame, and had only one eye. Her nose and chin almost touched, and she walked leaning on a stick. She was surely a fairy. She hobbled up to the children and asked in a snuffling voice, "Have you the grass here that sings, or the bird that is blue?" "We have some grass," replied Tyltyl, trembling all over his body, "but it can't sing." "Tyltyl has a bird," said Mytyl. "But I can't give it away because it's mine," the little fellow added quickly. Now wasn't that a capital reason? The Fairy put on her big round glasses and looked at the bird. "He's not blue enough," she exclaimed. "I must absolutely have the bluebird. It's for my little girl, who is very ill. Do you know what the bluebird stands for? No? I thought you didn't. And as you are good children, I will tell you." The Fairy raised her crooked finger to her long pointed nose and whispered in a mysterious tone, "The bluebird stands for happiness, and I want you to understand that my little girl must be happy in order to get well. That is why I now command you to go out into the world and find the bluebird for her. You will have to start at once. Do you know who I am?" The children exchanged puzzled glances. The fact was that they had never seen a fairy before, and they felt a little scared in her presence. However, Tyltyl soon said politely, "You are rather like our neighbour, Madame Berlingot." Tyltyl thought that, in saying this, he was paying the Fairy a compliment, for Madame Berlingot's shop, which was next door to their cottage, was a very pleasant place. It was stocked with sweets, marbles, chocolate cigars, and sugar dolls and hens. And at fair time there were big gingerbread dolls covered all over with gilt paper. Goody Berlingot had a nose that was quite as ugly as the Fairy's, and she was old also, and like the Fairy she walked doubled up in two. But she was very kind, and she had a dear little girl who used to play on Sundays with the woodcutter's children. Unfortunately, the poor little pretty fair-haired thing was always suffering from some unknown complaint, which often kept her in bed. When this happened, she used to beg and pray for Tyltyl's dove to play with, but Tyltyl was so fond of the bird that he would not give it to her. All this, thought the boy, was very like that which the Fairy told him, and that was why he called her Berlingot. Much to his surprise, the Fairy turned crimson with rage. It was a hobby of hers to be like nobody, because she was a fairy and able to change her appearance from one moment to the next as she pleased. That evening she happened to be ugly and old and humpbacked. She had lost one of her eyes, and 2 lean wisps of grey hair hung over her shoulders. "What do I look like?" she asked Tyltyl. "Am I pretty or ugly, old or young?" Her reason for asking these questions was to try the kindness of the little boy. He turned away his head and dared not say what he thought of her looks. Then she cried, "I am the Fairy Bérylune." "Oh, that's all right," answered Tyltyl, who by this time was shaking in every limb. This satisfied the Fairy, and as the children, who were still in their nightshirts, she told them to get dressed. She herself helped Mytyl, and while she did so, asked, "Where are your father and mother?" "In there," said Tyltyl, pointing to the door on the right. "They are asleep." "And your Grandad and Granny?" "They are dead." "And your little brothers and sisters? Have you any?" "Oh, yes, 3 little brothers," said Tyltyl. "And 4 little sisters," added Mytyl. "Where are they?" asked the Fairy. "They are dead too," answered Tyltyl. "Would you like to see them again?" "Oh, yes, at once. Show them to us." "I haven't them in my pocket," said the Fairy. "But this is very lucky. You will see them when you go through the land of memory. It's on the way to the Bluebird, just on the left, past the 3rd turning." "What were you doing when I knocked?" "We were playing at eating cakes," said Tyltyl. "Have you any cakes? Where are they?" "In the house of the rich children. Come and look, it's so lovely." And Tyltyl dragged the Fairy to the window. "But it's the others who are eating them," said she. "Yes, but we can see them eat," said Tyltyl. "Aren't you cross with them?" "What for?" "For eating all the cakes. I think it's very wrong of them not to give you any." "Not at all. They're rich. I say, isn't it beautiful over there?" "It's just the same here, only you can't see." "Yes, I can," said Tyltyl. "I have very good eyes. I can see the time on the church clock, and Daddy can't." The fairy suddenly grew angry. "I tell you that you can't see," she said, and she grew angrier and angrier, as though it mattered about seeing the time on the church clock. Of course, the little boy was not blind, but as he was kind-hearted and deserved to be happy, she wanted to teach him to see what is good and beautiful in all things. It was not an easy task, for she well knew that most people live and die without enjoying the happiness that lies all around them. Still, as she was a fairy, she was all-powerful, and so she decided to give him a little hat adorned with a magic diamond that would possess the extraordinary property of always showing him the truth, which would help him to see the inside of things, and thus teach him that each of them has a life and an existence of its own, created to match and gladden ours. The fairy took the little hat from a great bag hanging by her side. It was green and had a white cockade, with the big diamond shining in the middle of it. Tyltyl was beside himself with delight. The fairy explained to him how the diamond worked. By pressing the top, you saw the soul of things. If you gave it a little turn to the right, you discovered the past, and when you turned it to the left, you beheld the future. Tyltyl beamed all over his face and danced for joy, and then he at once became afraid of losing the little hat. "Daddy will take it from me," he cried. "No," said the fairy, "for no one can see it as long as it's on your head. Will you try it?" "Yes, yes!" cried the children, clapping their hands. The hat was no sooner on the little boy's head than a magic change came over everything. The old fairy turned into a young and beautiful princess, dressed all in silk and covered with sparkling jewels. The walls of the cottage home became transparent and gleamed like precious stones. The humble deal furniture shone like marble. The two children ran from right to left, clapping their hands and shouting with delight. "Oh, how lovely, how lovely!" exclaimed Tyltyl. And Mytyl, like the vain little thing she was, stood spellbound before the beauty of the fair princess's dress. But further and much greater surprises were in store for them. Had not the fairy said that the things and the animals would come to life, talk and behave like everybody else? Lo and behold, suddenly the door of the grandfather clock opened. The silence was filled with the sweetest music, and 12 little daintily dressed and laughing dancers began to skip and spin all around the children. "They are the hours of your life," said the fairy. "May I dance with them?" asked Tyltyl, gazing with admiration at those pretty creatures who seemed to skim over the floor like birds. But just then he burst into a wild fit of laughter. Who was that funny fat fellow, all out of breath and covered with flour, who came struggling out of the bread pan and bowing to the children? It was Bread! Bread himself, taking advantage of the reign of liberty to go for a little walk on earth. He looked like a stout, comical old gentleman. His face was puffed out with dough, and his large hands at the end of his thick arms were not able to meet when he laid them on his great round stomach. He was dressed in a tight-fitting, crust-colored suit, with stripes across the chest like those on the nice buttered rolls which we have for breakfast in the morning. On his head, just think of it, he wore an enormous bun, which made a funny sort of turban. He had hardly tumbled out of his pan when other loaves just like him, but smaller, followed after and began to frisk about with the hours, without giving a thought to the flour which they scattered over those pretty ladies and which wrapped them in great white clouds. It was a queer and charming dance, and the children were delighted. The hours waltzed with the loaves. The plates, joining in the fun, hopped up and down on the dresser, at the risk of falling off and smashing to pieces. The glasses in the cupboard clinked together, to drink the health of one and all. As to the forks, they chattered so loudly with the knives that you could not hear yourself speak for the noise. There is no knowing what would have happened if the din had lasted much longer. Daddy and Mummy Till would certainly have waked up. Fortunately, when the romp was at its height, an enormous flame darted out of the chimney and filled the room with a great red glow, as though the house were on fire. Everybody bolted into the corners in dismay, while Till and Mytyl, sobbing with fright, hid their heads under the good fairy's cloak. "Don't be afraid," she said. "It's only Fire, who has come to join in your fun. He is a good sort, but you had better not touch him, for he has a hot temper." Peeping anxiously through the beautiful gold lace that edged the fairy's cloak, the children saw a tall red fellow looking at them and laughing at their fears. He was dressed in scarlet tights and spangles. From his shoulders hung silk scarves that were just like flames when he waved them with his long arms, and his hair stood up on his head in straight, flaring locks. He started flinging out his arms and legs and jumping round the room like a madman. Till, though feeling a little easier, dared not yet leave his refuge. Then the fairy Bériloune had a capital idea. She pointed her wand at the tap, and at once there appeared a young girl who wept like a regular fountain. It was Water. She was very pretty, but she looked extremely sad, and she sang so sweetly that it was like the rippling of a spring. Her long hair, which fell to her feet, might have been made of seaweed. She had nothing on her but her bedgown, but the water that streamed over her clothed her in shimmering colours. She hesitated at first and gave a glance around her. Then, catching sight of Fire, still whirling about like a great madcap, she made an angry and indignant rush at him, spraying his face, splashing and wetting him with all her might. Fire flew into a rage and began to smoke. Nevertheless, as he found himself suddenly thwarted by his old enemy, he thought it wiser to retire to a corner. Water also beat a retreat, and it seemed as though peace would be restored once more. The two children, at last recovering from their alarm, were asking the fairy what was going to happen next, when a startling noise of breaking crockery made them look round towards the table. What a surprise! The milk jug lay on the floor, smashed into 1,000 fragments, and from the pieces rose a charming lady, who gave little screams of terror and clasped her hands and turned up her eyes with a beseeching glance. Till hastened to console her, for he at once knew that she was Milk, and as he was very fond of her, he gave her a good kiss. She was as fresh and pretty as a little dairymaid, and a delicious scent of hay came from her white frock all covered with cream. Meanwhile, Mytyl was watching the sugar loaf, which also seemed to be coming to life. Packed in its blue paper wrapper on a shelf near the door, it was swaying from left to right and from right to left without any result. But at last a long thin arm was seen to come out, followed by a peaked head, which split the paper, and by another arm and 2 long legs that seemed never to end. Oh, you should have seen how funny Sugar looked, so funny indeed that the children could not help laughing in his face. And yet they would have liked to be civil to him, for they heard the fairy introducing him in these words: "This, Till, is the soul of Sugar. His pockets are crammed with sugar, and each of his fingers is a sugar stick." How wonderful to have a friend all made of sugar, of whom you can bite a piece whenever you feel inclined. "Bow, wow, wow! Good morning, my little god! At last we can talk. Bark and wag my tail as I might, you never understood. I love you, I love you." Who can this extraordinary person be, who jostles everybody and fills the house with his noisy gaiety? We know him at once. It is Tylo, the good dog who tries his hardest to understand mankind, the good-natured animal who goes with the children to the forest, the faithful guardian who protects the door, the staunch friend who is ever true and ever loyal. Here he comes, walking on his hind paws, as on a pair of legs too short for him, and beating the air with the two others, making gestures like a clumsy little man. He has not changed. He still has his smooth, mustard-colored coat and his jolly bulldog head with the black muzzle. But he is much bigger, and then he talks. He talks as fast as he can, as though he wanted in one moment to avenge his whole race, which has been doomed to silence for centuries. He talks of everything, now that he is at last able to explain himself, and it is a pretty sight to see him kissing his little master and mistress and calling them his little gods. He sits up, he jumps about the room, knocking against the furniture, upsetting Mytyl with his big soft paws, lolling his tongue, wagging his tail, and puffing and panting as though he were out hunting. We at once see his simple, generous nature. Persuaded of his own importance, he fancies that he alone is indispensable in the new world of things. After making all the fuss he wanted of the children, he started going the round of the company, distributing the attentions which he thought that none could do without. His joy, now set free, found vent without restraint, and because he was the most loving of creatures, he would also have been the happiest, if, in becoming human, he had not unfortunately retained his little doggy failings. He was jealous. He was terribly jealous, and his heart felt a pang when he saw Tylette, the cat, coming to life in her turn, and being petted and kissed by the children, just as he had been. Oh, how he hated the cat! To bear the sight of her beside him, to see her always sharing in the affection of the family, that was the great sacrifice which fate demanded of him. He accepted it, however, without a word, because it pleased his little gods, and he went so far as to leave her alone. But he had many a crime on his conscience because of her. Had he not one evening crept stealthily into Goody Burlingot's kitchen in order to throttle her old tomcat, who had never done him any harm? Had he not broken the back of the Persian cat at the hall opposite? Did he not sometimes go to town on purpose to hunt cats and put an end to them, all to wreak his spite? And now Tylette was going to talk, just like himself. Tylette would be his equal in the new world that was opening before him. "Oh, there's no justice left in the world," was his bitter thought. "There is no justice left." In the meantime, the cat, who had begun by washing herself and polishing her claws, calmly put out her paw to the little girl. She really was a very pretty cat, and if our friend Tylo's jealousy had not been such an ugly feeling, we might almost have overlooked it for once. How could you fail to be attracted by Tylette's eyes, which were like topaz set in emeralds? How could you resist the pleasure of stroking the wonderful black velvet back? How could you not love her grace, her gentleness, and the dignity of her poses? Smiling gently and speaking in well-chosen language, she said to Mytyl, "Good morning, miss. How well you look this morning." And the children patted her like anything. Tylo kept watching the cat from the other end of the room. "Now that she's standing on her hind legs like a man," he muttered, "she looks just like the devil, with her pointed ears, her long tail, and her dress as black as ink." And he could not help growling between his teeth. "She's also like the village chimney-sweep," he went on, "whom I loathe and detest, and whom I shall never take for a real man, whatever my little gods may say. It's lucky," he added with a sigh, "that I know more about a good many things than they do." But suddenly, no longer able to master himself, he flew at the cat and shouted with a loud laugh that was more like a roar, "I am going to frighten Tylette! Bow, wow, wow!" But the cat, who is dignified even when still an animal, now thought herself called to the loftiest destinies. She considered that the time had come to raise a tall barrier between herself and the dog, who had never been more than an ill-bred person in her eyes, and stepping back in disdain, she just said, "Sir, I don't know you." Tylo gave a bound under the insult, whereupon the cat bristled up, twisting her whiskers under her little pink nose, for she was very proud of those 2 pale blotches which gave a special touch to her dark beauty. And then, arching her back and sticking up her tail, she hissed out, "Pht, pht," and stood stock still on the chest of drawers like a dragon on the lid of a Chinese vase. Tyltyl and Mytyl screamed with laughter, but the quarrel would certainly have had a bad ending if at that moment a great thing had not happened. At 11 o'clock in the evening, in the middle of that winter's night, a great light, the light of the noonday sun, glowing and dazzling, burst into the cottage. "Hullo, there's daylight," said the little boy, who no longer knew what to make of things. "What will Daddy say?" But before the fairy had time to set him right, Tyltyl understood, and full of wonderment, he knelt before the latest vision that bewitched his eyes. At the window, in the center of a great halo of sunshine, there rose slowly, like a tall golden sheaf, a maiden of surpassing loveliness. Gleaming veils covered her figure without hiding its beauty. Her bare arms, stretched in the attitude of giving, seemed transparent, and her great clear eyes wrapped all upon whom they fell in a fond embrace. "It's the Queen," said Tyltyl. "It's a fairy princess," cried Mytyl, kneeling beside her brother. "No, my children," said the fairy. "It is Light." Smiling, Light stepped towards the 2 little ones. She, the light of heaven, the strength and beauty of the earth, was proud of the humble mission entrusted to her. She, never before held captive, living in space and bestowing her bounty upon all alike, consented to be confined for a brief spell within a human shape, so as to lead the children out into the world and teach them to know that other light, the light of the mind, which we never see, but which helps us to see all things that are. "It is Light!" exclaimed the things and the animals, and, as they all loved her, they began to dance around her with cries of pleasure. Tyltyl and Mytyl capered with joy. Never had they pictured so amusing and so pretty a party, and they shouted louder than all the rest. Then what was bound to happen came. Suddenly 3 knocks were heard against the wall, loud enough to throw the house down. It was Daddy Tyl, who had been waked up by the din and who was now threatening to come and put a stop to it. "Turn the diamond!" cried the fairy to Tyltyl. Our hero hastened to obey, but he had not the knack of it yet. Besides, his hand shook at the thought that his father was coming. In fact, he was so awkward that he nearly broke the works. "Not so quick, not so quick," said the fairy. "Oh dear, you've turned it too briskly. They will not have time to resume their places, and we shall have a lot of bother." There was a general stampede. The walls of the cottage lost their splendor. All ran hither and thither to return to their proper shape. Fire could not find his chimney. Water ran about looking for her tap. Sugar stood moaning in front of his torn wrapper. And Bread, the biggest of the loaves, was unable to squeeze into his pan, in which the other loaves had jumped higgledy-piggledy, taking up all the room. As for the dog, he had grown too large for the hole in his kennel, and the cat also could not get into her basket. The Hours alone, who were accustomed always to run faster than man wished, had slipped back into the clock without delay. Light stood motionless and unruffled, vainly setting an example of calmness to the others, who were all weeping and wailing around the fairy. "What is going to happen?" they asked. "Is there any danger?" "Well," said the fairy, "I am bound to tell you the truth. All those who accompany the 2 children will die at the end of the journey." They began to cry like anything, all except the dog, who was delighted at remaining human as long as possible, and who had already taken his stand next to Light, so as to be sure of going in front of his little master and mistress. At that moment there came a knocking even more dreadful than before. "There's Daddy again," said Tyltyl. "He's getting up this time. I can hear him walking." "You see," said the Fairy, "you have no choice now. It is too late. You must all start with us. But you, Fire, don't come near anybody. You, Dog, don't tease the Cat. You, Water, try not to run all over the place. And you, Sugar, stop crying unless you want to melt. Bread shall carry the cage in which to put the Bluebird, and you shall all come to my house, where I will dress the animals and the things properly. Let us go out this way." As she spoke, she pointed her wand at the window, which lengthened magically downwards like a door. They all went out on tiptoe, after which the window resumed its usual shape. And so it came about that, on Christmas night, in the clear light of the moon, while the bells rang out lustily, proclaiming the birth of Jesus, Tyltyl and Mytyl went in search of the Bluebird that was to bring them happiness. End of The Woodcutter's Cottage.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children, written by Georgette Leblanc, edited by Frederick Orville Perkins, and translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 2, At the Fairies, read by Ian King. The Fairy Berylind's palace stood at the top of a very high mountain on the way to the moon. It was so near that on summer nights, when the sky was clear, you could plainly see the moon's mountains and valleys, lakes and seas from the terrace of the palace. Here the Fairy studied the stars and read their secrets, for it was long since the earth had had anything to teach her. "This old planet no longer interests me," she used to say to her friends, the giants of the mountain. "The men upon it still live with their eyes shut. Poor things! I pity them. I go down among them now and then, but it is not of charity, to try and save the little children from the fatal misfortune that awaits them in the darkness." This explains why she had come and knocked at the door of Daddy Tyl's cottage on Christmas Eve. And now to return to our travellers. They had hardly reached the high road when the Fairy remembered that they could not walk like that through the village, which was still lit up because of the feast. But her store of knowledge was so great that all her wishes were fulfilled at once. She pressed lightly on Tyltyl's head and willed that they should all be carried by magic to her palace. Then and there a cloud of fireflies surrounded our companions and wafted them gently towards the sky. They were at the Fairy's palace before they had recovered from their surprise. "Follow me," she said, and led them through the chambers and passages all in gold and silver. They stopped in a large room surrounded with mirrors on every side and containing an enormous wardrobe, with light creeping through its chinks. The Fairy Berylinde took a diamond key from her pocket and opened the wardrobe. One cry of amazement burst from every throat. Precious stuffs were seen piled one on top of the other, mantles covered with gems, dresses of every sort and every country, pearl coronets, emerald necklaces, ruby bracelets. Never had the children beheld such riches. As for the things, their state was rather one of utter bewilderment. And this was only natural, when you think that they were seeing the world for the first time and that it showed itself to them in such a queer way. The Fairy helped them make their choice. Fire, Sugar and the Cat displayed a certain decision of taste. Fire, who only cared for red, at once chose a splendid bright red dress, with gold spangles. He put nothing on his head, for his head was always very hot. Sugar could not stand anything except white and pale blue. Bright colours jarred on his sweet nature. The long blue and white dress which he selected and the pointed hat like a candle extinguisher, which he wore on his head, made him look perfectly ridiculous. But he was too silly to notice it, and kept spinning before the glass like a top and admiring himself in blissful ignorance. The Cat, who was always a lady and who was used to her dusky garments, reflected that black always looks well in any circumstance, particularly now when they were travelling without luggage. She therefore put on a suit of black tights with jet embroidery, hung a long velvet cloak from her shoulders and perched a large cavalier hat with a long feather on her neat little head. She next asked for a pair of soft kid boots in memory of Puss in Boots, her distinguished ancestor, and put a pair of gloves on her forepaws to protect them from the dust of the roads. Thus attired, she took a satisfied glance at the mirror. Then, a little nervously, with her anxious eye and her quivering pink nose, she hastily invited Sugar and Fire to take the air with her. So they all three walked out, while the others went on dressing. Let us follow them for a moment, for we have already grown to like our brave little Tyltyl, and we shall want to hear anything that is likely to help or delay his undertaking. After passing through several splendid galleries, hung like balconies in the sky, our three cronies stopped in the hall, and the Cat at once addressed the meeting in a hushed voice.
"I have brought you here," she said, "in order to discuss the position in which we are placed. Let us make the most of our last moment of liberty."
But she was interrupted by a furious uproar.
"Bow, wow, wow! There now!" cried the Cat. "There's that idiot of a dog! He has scented us out! We can't get a minute's peace. Let us hide behind the balustrade. He had better not hear what I have to say to you."
"It's too late,"
said Sugar, who was standing by the door. And sure enough, Tyler was coming up, jumping, barking, panting and delighted. The Cat, when she saw him, turned away in disgust.
"He has put on the livery of one of the footmen of Cinderella's coach. It is just the thing for him. He has the soul of a flunkey."
She ended these words with a and, stroking her whiskers, took up her stand with a defiant air between Sugar and Fire. The good dog did not see her little game. He was wholly wrapped up in the pleasure of being gorgeously arrayed, and he danced round and round. It was really funny to see his velvet cloak whirling like a merry-go-round, with the skirts opening every now and then and showing his little stumpy tail, which was all the more expressive as it had to express itself very briefly. For I need hardly tell you that Tylo, like every well-bred bulldog, had had his tail and his ears cropped as a puppy. Poor fellow! He had long envied the tails of his brother dogs, which allowed them to use a much larger and more varied vocabulary. But physical deficiencies and the hardships of fortune strengthened our innermost qualities. Tylo's soul, having no outward means of expressing itself, had only gained through silence, and his look, which was always filled with love, had become very eloquent. To-day his big dark eyes glistened with delight. He had suddenly changed into a man. He was all over magnificent clothes and he was about to perform a grand errand across the world in company with the gods.
"There,"
he said.
"There, aren't we fine? Just look at this lace and embroidery. It's real gold and no mistake."
He did not see that the others were laughing at him, for, to tell the truth, he did look very comical, but, like all simple creatures, he had no sense of humour. He was so proud of his natural garment of yellow hair that he had put on no waistcoat, in order that no one might have a doubt as to where he sprang from. For the same reason he had kept his collar, with his address on it. A big red velvet coat, heavily braided with gold lace, reached to his knees, and the large pockets on either side would enable him, he thought, always to carry a few provisions. For Tyler was very greedy. On his left ear he wore a little round cap with an osprey feather in it, and he kept it on his big square head by means of an elastic which cut his fat loose cheeks in two. His other ear remained free, cropped close to his head in the shape of a little paper screw-bag. This ear was the watchful receiver into which all the sounds of life fell, like pebbles disturbing its rest. He had also encased his hind legs in a pair of patent leather riding boots, with white tops, but his forepaws he considered of such use that nothing would have induced him to put them into gloves. Tylo had too natural a character to change his little ways all in a day, and, in spite of his new-blown honours, he allowed himself to do undignified things. He was at the present moment lying on the steps of the hall, scratching the ground and sniffing at the wall, when suddenly he gave a start and began to whine and whimper. His lower lip shook nervously as though he were going to cry.
"What's the matter with the idiot now?"
asked the Cat, who was watching him out of the corner of her eye. But she at once understood. A very sweet song came from the distance, and Tylo could not endure music. The song drew nearer. A girl's fresh voice filled the shadows of the lofty arches, and Water appeared, tall, slender and white as a pearl. She seemed to glide rather than to walk. Her movements were so soft and graceful that they were suspected rather than seen. A beautiful silvery dress waved and floated around her, and her hair, decked with corals, flowed below her knees. When Fire caught sight of her, like the rude and spiteful fellow he was, he sneered.
"She's not brought her umbrella."
But Water, who was really quite witty and who knew that she was the stronger of the two, chaffed him pleasantly and said with a glance at his glowing nose:
"I beg your pardon. I thought you might be speaking of a great red nose I saw the other day."
The others began to laugh and poke fun at Fire, whose face was always like a red-hot coal. Fire angrily jumped to the ceiling, keeping his revenge for later. Meanwhile, the Cat went up to Water very cautiously and paid her ever so many compliments on her dress. I need hardly tell you that she did not mean a word of it, but she wished to be friendly with everybody, for she wanted their votes to carry out her plan, and she was anxious at not seeing Bread because she did not want to speak before the meeting was complete.
"What can he be doing?"
she meowed time after time.
"He was making an endless fuss about choosing his dress,"
said the Dog.
"At last he decided in favour of a Turkish robe with a scimitar and a turban."
The words were not out of his mouth when a shapeless and ridiculous bulk, clad in all the colours of the rainbow, came and blocked the narrow door of the hall. It was the enormous stomach of Bread, who filled the whole opening. He kept on knocking himself without knowing why, for he was not very clever and, besides, he was not very used to moving about in human beings' houses. At last, it occurred to him to stoop, and by squeezing through sideways, he managed to make his way into the hall. It was certainly not a triumphal entry, but he was pleased with it all the same.
"Here I am,"
he said.
"Here I am. I have put on Bluebeard's finest dress. What do you think of this?"
The Dog began to frisk around him. He thought Bread magnificent. That yellow velvet costume, covered all over with silver crescents, reminded Tylo of the delicious horseshoe rolls which he loved, and the huge gaudy turban on Bread's head was really very like a fairy bun.
"How nice he looks!"
he cried.
"How nice he looks!"
Bread was shyly followed by Milk. Her simple mind had made her prefer her cream dress to all the finery which the fairy suggested to her. She was really a model of humility. Bread was beginning to talk about the dresses of Tyltyl, Light and Mytyl, when the Cat cut him short in a masterful voice.
"We shall see them in good time,"
she said.
"Stop chattering, listen to me. Time presses. Our future is at stake."
They all looked at her with a bewildered air. They understood that it was a solemn moment, but the human language was still full of mystery to them. Sugar wriggled his long fingers as a sign of distress. Bread patted his huge stomach. Water lay on the floor and seemed to suffer from the most profound despair. And Milk only had eyes for Bread, who had been her friend for ages and ages. The Cat, becoming impatient, continued her speech.
The fairy has just said it. The end of this journey will, at the same time, mark the end of our lives. It is our business, therefore, to spin the journey out as long as possible, and by every means in our power.
Bread, who was afraid of being eaten as soon as he was no longer a man, hastened to express approval, but the dog, who was standing a little way off, pretending not to hear, began to growl deep down in his soul. He knew what the cat was driving at, and when Tylette ended her speech with the words,
"We must at all costs prolong the journey and prevent Bluebird from being found, even if it means endangering the lives of the children,"
the good dog, obeying only the promptings of his heart, leapt at the cat to bite her. Sugar, Bread and Fire lunged themselves between them.
"Order! Order!"
said Bread pompously.
"I'm in the chair at this meeting."
"Who made you chairman?"
stormed Fire.
"Who asked you to interfere?"
asked Water, whirling her wet hair over Fire.
"Excuse me?"
said Sugar, shaking all over in conciliatory tones.
"Excuse me, this is a serious moment. Let us talk things over in a friendly way."
"I quite agree with Sugar and the cat,"
said Bread, as though that ended the matter.
"This is ridiculous,"
said the dog, barking and showing his teeth.
"There is Man, and that's all. We have to obey him and do as he tells us. I recognise no one but him. Hooray for Man! Man forever! In life or death, all for Man! Man is everything!"
But the cat's shrill voice rose above all the others. She was full of grudges against Man, and she wanted to make use of the short spell of humanity which she now enjoyed to avenge her whole race.
"All of us here present,"
she cried,
"animals, things and elements, possess a soul which Man does not yet know. That is why we retain a remnant of independence. But if he finds the Bluebird, he will know all and he will see all, and we shall be completely at his mercy. Remember the time when he wandered at liberty upon the face of the earth?"
But suddenly her face changed, her voice sank to a whisper, and she hissed,
"Look out! I hear the fairy and Light coming. I need hardly tell you that Light has taken sides with Man and means to stand by him. She is our worst enemy. Be careful."
But our friends had had no practice in trickery, and feeling themselves in the wrong, took up such ridiculous and uncomfortable attitudes that the fairy, the moment she appeared upon the threshold, exclaimed,
"What are you doing in that corner? You look like a pack of conspirators."
Quite scared, and thinking that the fairy had already guessed their wicked intentions, they fell upon their knees before her. Luckily for them, the fairy hardly gave a thought to what was passing through their little minds. She had come to explain the first part of the journey to the children, and to tell each of the others what to do. Tyltyl and Mytyl stood hand in hand in front of her, looking a little frightened and a little awkward in their fine clothes. They stared at each other in childish admiration. The little girl was wearing a yellow silk frock embroidered with pink posies and covered with gold spangles. On her head was a lovely orange velvet cap, and a starched muslin tucker covered her little arms. Tyltyl was dressed in a red jacket and blue knickerbockers, both of velvet, and of course he wore the wonderful little hat on his head. The fairy said to them,
"It is just possible that the Bluebird is hiding at your grandparents' in the land of memory, so you will go there first."
"But how shall we see them, if they are dead?" asked Tyltyl. Then the good fairy explained that they would not really be dead until their grandchildren ceased to think of them.
"Men do not know this secret,"
she added.
"but thanks to the diamond, you, Tyltyl, will see that the dead whom we remember live as happily as though they were not dead."
"Are you coming with us?"
asked the boy, turning to Light, who stood in the doorway and lit up all the hall.
"No,"
said the fairy.
"Light must not look at the past.
Her energies must be devoted to the future. The two children were starting on their way when they discovered that they were very hungry. The fairy at once ordered bread to give them something to eat, and that big fat fellow, delighted with the importance of his duty, undid the top of his robe, drew his scimitar and cut 2 slices out of his stomach. The children screamed with laughter. Paulo dropped his gloomy thoughts for a moment and begged for a bit of bread, and everybody struck up the farewell chorus. Sugar, who was very full of himself, also wanted to impress the company, and breaking off 2 of his fingers, handed them to the astonished children. As they were all moving towards the door, the Fairy Berylyn stopped them. "Not today," she said. "The children must go alone. It will be indiscreet to accompany them. They are going to spend the evening with their late family. Come, be off. Goodbye, dear children, and mind that you are back in good time. It is extremely important." The 2 children took each other by the hand and, carrying the big cage, passed out of the hall, and their companions, at a sign from the fairy, filed in front of her to return to the palace. Our friend Paulo was the only one who did not answer to his name. The moment he heard the fairy say that the children were to go alone, he had made up his mind to go and look after them, whatever happened. And, while the others were saying goodbye, he hid himself behind the door. But the poor fellow had reckoned without the all-seeing eyes of the Fairy Berylyn. "Paulo!" she cried. "Paulo here!" And the poor dog, who had so long been used to obey, dared not resist the command, and came with his tail between his legs to take his place among the others. He howled with despair when he saw his little master and mistress swallowed up in the great gold staircase. End of Chapter 2, read by Ian King. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children, written by Georgette Leblanc, edited by Frederick Orville Perkins, and translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 3, The Land of Memory, read by Ian King. The Fairy Berylyn had told the children that the Land of Memory was not far off, but to reach it you had to go through a forest that was so dense and so old that your eyes could not see the tops of the trees. It was always shrouded in a heavy mist, and the children would certainly have lost their way if the fairy had not said to them beforehand, "It is straight ahead, and there is only one road." The ground was carpeted with flowers, which were all alike. They were snow-white pansies and very pretty, but as they never saw the sun, they had no scent. Those little flowers comforted the children, who felt extremely lonely. A great mysterious silence surrounded them, and they trembled a little with a very pleasant sense of fear which they had never felt before.
"Let's take Granny a bunch of flowers,"
said Mytel.
"That's a good idea. She will be pleased,"
cried Tyltyl. And as they walked along, the children gathered a beautiful white nosegay. The dear little things did not know that every pansy, which means a thought, that they picked brought them nearer to their grandparents. And they soon saw before them a large oak with a notice board nailed to it.
"Here we are!"
cried the boy in triumph, as climbing up on the root, he read,
"The Land of Memory."
They arrived, but they turned to every side without seeing a thing.
"I can see nothing at all,"
whimpered Mytel.
"I'm cold. I'm tired. I don't want to travel any more."
Tyltyl, who was wholly wrapped up in his errand, lost his temper.
"Come, don't keep crying just like water. You ought to be ashamed of yourself,"
he said.
"There, look! Look! The fog is lifting!"
And sure enough, the mist parted before their eyes like veils torn by an invisible hand. The big trees faded away, everything vanished, and, instead, there appeared a pretty little peasant's cottage covered with creepers and standing in a little garden filled with flowers and with trees, all over fruit. The children at once knew the dear cow in the orchard, the watchdog at the door, the blackbird in his wicker cage, and everything was steeped in a pale light and a warm, balmy air. Tyltyl and Mytyl stood amazed. So that was the land of memory! What lovely weather it was! And how nice it felt to be there! They at once made up their minds to come back often, now that they knew the way. But how great was their happiness when the last veil disappeared and they saw, at a few steps from them, Grandad and Granny sitting on a bench, sound asleep. They clapped their hands and called out gleefully:
"It's Grandad! It's Granny! There they are! There they are!"
But they were a little scared by this great piece of magic and dared not move from behind the tree. And they stood looking at the dear old couple, who woke up gently and slowly under their eyes. Then they heard Granny Tyl's trembling voice say:
"I have a notion that our grandchildren who are still alive are coming to see us today."
And Gaffer Tyl answered:
"They are certainly thinking of us, for I feel queer and I have pins and needles in my legs. I think they must be quite near,"
said Granny,
"for I see tears of joy dancing before my eyes and..."
Granny had not time to finish her sentence. The children were in her arms. What joy! What wild kisses and huggings! What a wonderful surprise! The happiness was too great for words. They laughed and tried to speak and kept on looking at one another with delighted eyes. It was so glorious and so unexpected to meet again like this. When the first excitement was over, they all began to talk at once.
"How tall and strong you've grown, Tyltyl,"
said Granny, and Grandad cried:
"And Mytyl, just look at her! What pretty hair! What pretty eyes!"
And the children danced and clapped their hands and flung themselves by turns into the arms of one or the other. At last they quieted down a little, and with Mytyl nestling against Grandad's chest and Tyltyl comfortably perched on Granny's knees, they began to talk of family affairs.
"How are Daddy and Mummy, Tyl?"
asked Granny.
"Quite well, Granny,"
said Tyltyl.
"They were asleep when we went out."
Granny gave them fresh kisses and said:
"My word, how pretty they are and how nice and clean! Why don't you come to see us oftener? It is months and months now that you have forgotten us and that we have seen nobody." "We couldn't, Granny," said Tyltyl. "And today it's only because of the fairy. We are always here,"
said Granny Tyl,
"waiting for a visit from those who are alive. The last time you were here was on All Hallows." "All Hallows? We didn't go out that day, for we both had colds." But you thought of us. And every time you think of us, we wake up and see you again."
Tyltyl remembered that the fairy had told him this. He had not thought it possible then, but now, with his head on the heart of the dear Granny whom he had missed so much, he began to understand things and he felt that his grandparents had not left him altogether. He asked:
"So you are not really dead?"
The old couple burst out laughing. When they exchanged their life on earth for another and a much nicer and more beautiful life, they had forgotten the word dead.
"What does that word dead mean?"
asked Gaffer Tyl.
"Why, it means that one's no longer alive,"
said Tyltyl. Grandad and Granny only shrugged their shoulders.
"How stupid the living are when they speak of the others,"
was all they said. And they went over their memories again, rejoicing in being able to chat. All old people love discussing old times. The future is finished as far as they are concerned, and so they delight in the present and the past. But we are growing impatient like Tyltyl, and instead of listening to them, we will follow our little friend's movements. He had jumped off Granny's knee and was poking about in every corner, delighted at finding all sorts of things which he knew and remembered.
"Nothing has changed, everything is in its old place,"
he cried. And as he had not been to the old people's home for so long, everything struck him as much nicer. And he added: in the voice of one who knows.
"Only everything is prettier. Hello, there's the clock with the big hand which I broke the point off, and the hole which I made in the door the day I found Grandad's gimlet."
"Yes, you've done some damage in your time,"
said Grandad.
"And there's the plum tree which you were so fond of climbing
when I wasn't looking."
Meantime, Tyltyl was not forgetting his errand.
"You haven't the bluebird here by chance, I suppose?"
At the same moment, Mytyl lifted her head, saw a cage.
"Hello, there's the old blackbird. Does he still sing?"
As she spoke, the blackbird woke up and began to sing at the top of his voice.
"You see,"
said Granny,
"as soon as one thinks of him..."
Tyltyl was simply amazed at what he saw.
"But he's blue!"
he shouted.
"Why, that's the bird, the bluebird! He's blue, blue, blue as the blue glass marble! Will you give him to me?"
The grandparents gladly consented, and full of triumph, Tyltyl went and fetched the cage which he had left by the tree. He took hold of the precious bird with the greatest of care, and it began to hop about in its new home.
"How pleased the fairy will be!"
said the boy, rejoicing at his conquest.
"And Light too! Come along,
said the grandparents.
Come and look at the cow. Come and look at the cow and the bees."
As the old couple were beginning to toddle across the garden, the children suddenly asked if their little dead brothers and sisters were there too. At the same moment, 7 little children, who, up to then, had been sleeping in the house, came tearing like mad into the garden. Tyltyl and Mytyl ran up to them. They all hustled and hugged one another and danced and whirled about and uttered screams of joy.
Here they are,
said Granny.
"As soon as you speak of them, they are there, the imps."
Tyltyl caught a little one by the hair.
"Hello, Pierrot. So we're going to fight again, as in the olden days. And Robert, I say, Jean, what's become of your top? Madeline and Peretti and Pauline. And here's Riquet."
Mytyl laughed.
"Riquet's still crawling on all fours."
Tyltyl noticed a little dog yapping around them.
"There's Kiki, whose tail I cut off with Pauline's scissors. He hasn't changed either."
"No,"
said Gaffer Tyl in a voice of great importance.
"Nothing changes here."
But suddenly, amid the general rejoicings, the old people stopped, spellbound. They had heard the small voice of the clock indoors strike 8.
"How's this?"
they asked.
"How's this?"
"It never strikes nowadays."
"That's because we no longer think of the time,"
said Granny.
"Was anyone thinking of the time?" "Yes, I was,"
said Tyltyl.
"So it's 8 o'clock. Then I'm off, for I promised Light to be back before 9.
He was going for the cage, but the others were too happy to let him run away so soon. It would be horrid to say goodbye like that. Granny had a good idea. She knew what a little glutton Tyltyl was. It was just supper time, and as luck would have it, there was some capital cabbage soup and a beautiful plum tart.
"Well,"
said our hero,
"as I've got the bluebird, and cabbage soup is a thing you don't have every day."
They all hurried and carried the table outside and laid it with a nice white tablecloth and put a plate for each. And lastly, Granny brought out the steaming soup tureen in state. The lamp was lit and the grandparents and grandchildren sat down to supper, jostling and elbowing one another and laughing and shouting with pleasure. Then, for a time, nothing was heard but the sound of the wooden spoons noisily clattering against the soup plates.
"Oh, how good it is! Oh, how good it is!"
shouted Tyltyl, who was eating greedily.
"I want some more, more! A little more quiet,"
said Grandad.
"You're just as ill-behaved as ever, and you'll break your plate."
Tyltyl took no notice of the remark, stood up on his stool, caught hold of the tureen and dragged it towards him and upset it, and the hot soup trickled all over the table and down upon everybody's lap. The children yelled and screamed with pain. Granny was quite scared and Grandad was furious. He dealt our friend Tyltyl a tremendous box on the ear. Tyltyl was staggered for a moment and then he put his hand to his cheek with a look of rapture and exclaimed:
"Grandad, how good, how jolly! It was just like the slaps you used to give me when you were alive. I must give you a kiss for it."
Everybody laughed.
"There's more where that came from, if you like them,"
said Grandad grumpily. But he was touched all the same and turned to wipe a tear from his eyes.
"Goodness!"
cried Tyltyl, starting up.
"There's 8:30 striking. Mytel, we've only just got time."
Granny in vain implored them to stay a few minutes longer.
"No, we can't possibly,"
said Tyltyl firmly.
"I promised Light."
And he hurried to take up the precious cage.
"Goodbye, Grandad. Goodbye, Granny. Goodbye, brothers and sisters, Perrot, Robert, Pauline, Madeline, Cricket, and you too, Kiki. We can't stay. Don't cry, Granny. We will come back often."
Poor old Grandad was very much upset and complained lustily.
"Gracious me, how tiresome the living are, with all their fuss and excitement!"
Tyltyl tried to console him and again promised to come back very often.
"Come back every day,"
said Granny.
"It is our only pleasure and it's such a treat for us when your thoughts pay us a visit. Goodbye,
goodbye, goodbye, goodbye," cried the brothers and sisters in chorus. "Come back very soon.
Come back very soon.
Come back
Bring
very
us some
soon.
barley
Come
sugar.
back very soon.
Bring us some barley sugar."
There were more kisses. All waved their handkerchiefs. All shouted a last goodbye.
Goodbye.
But the figures began to fade away. The little voices could no longer be heard. The two children were once more wrapped in mist, and the old forest covered them with its great dark mantle.
"I'm so frightened,"
whimpered Mytyl.
"Give me your hand, little brother. I'm so frightened."
Tyltyl was shaking too, but it was his duty to try and comfort and console his sister.
"Hush!"
he said.
"Remember that we are bringing back the bluebird."
As he spoke, a thin ray of light pierced the gloom, and the little boy hurried towards it. He was holding his cage tight in his arms, and the first thing he did was to look at his bird. Alas and alack! What a disappointment awaited him! The beautiful bluebird in the land of memory had turned quite black. Oh, how well he knew the old blackbird that used to sing in its wicker prison in the old days at the doors of the house! What had happened? How painful it was, and how cruel life seemed to him just then! He had started on his journey with such zest and delight that he had not thought for a moment of the difficulties and dangers. Full of confidence, pluck and kindness, he marched off, certain of finding the beautiful bluebird which would bring happiness to the fairy's little girl. And now all his hopes were shattered. For the first time our poor friend understood the trials, the vexations and the obstacles that awaited him. Alas! Was he attempting an impossible thing? Was the fairy making fun of him? Would he ever find the bluebird? All his courage seemed to be leaving him. To add to his misfortunes, he could not find the straight road by which he had come. There was not a single white pansy on the ground, and he began to cry. Luckily, our little friends were not to remain in trouble long. The fairy had promised that Light would watch over them. The first trial was over, and just outside the old people's house, a little while ago, the mist now suddenly lifted. But instead of disclosing a peaceful picture, a gentle, homely scene, it revealed a marvellous temple with a blinding glare streaming from it. On the threshold stood Light, fair and beautiful in her diamond-coloured dress. She smiled when Tyltyl told her of his first failure. She knew what the little ones were seeking. She knew everything. For Light surrounds all mortals with her love, though none of them is fond enough of her ever to receive her thoroughly and thus to learn all the secrets of truth. Now, for the first time, thanks to the diamond which the fairy had given to the boy, she was going to try and conquer a human soul.
"Do not be sad,"
she said to the children.
"Are you not pleased to have seen your grandparents? Is that not enough happiness for one day? Are you not glad to have restored the old blackbird to life? Listen to him singing."
For the old blackbird was singing with his might and main, and his little yellow eyes sparkled with pleasure as he hopped about his big cage.
As you look for the bluebird, dear children, accustom yourselves to love the grey birds, which you find on your way.
She nodded her fair head gravely, and it was quite clear that she knew where the bluebird was. But life is often full of beautiful mysteries which we must respect, lest we should destroy them. And, if Light had told the children where the bluebird was, well, they would never have found him. I will tell you why at the end of this story. And now let us leave our little friends to sleep on beautiful white clouds under Light's watchful care. The end of Chapter 3, The Land of Memory, read by Ian King. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children, written by Georgette Leblanc, edited by Frederick Orville Perkins, translated by Alexander Terexier de Matos, and read by Ian King. Chapter 4, The Palace of Night. Some time after the children and their friends met at the first dawn to go to the Palace of Night, where they hoped to find the bluebird, several of the party failed to answer to their names when the roll was called. Milk, for whom any sort of excitement was bad, was keeping her room. Water sent an excuse. She was accustomed always to travel in a bed of moss, was already half dead with fatigue and was afraid of falling ill. As for Light, she had been on bad terms with Night since the world began, and Fire, as a relation, shared her dislike. Light kissed the children and told Tylo the way, for it was his business to lead the expedition, and the little band set out upon its road. You can imagine dear Tylo trotting ahead on his hind legs like a little man, with his nose in the air, his tongue dangling down his chin, his front paws folded across his chest. He fidgets, sniffs about, runs up and down, covering twice the ground without minding how tired it makes him. He is so full of his own importance that he disdains the temptations on his path. He neglects the rubbish heaps, pays no attention to anything he sees, and cuts all his old friends. Poor Tylo, he was so delighted to become a man, and yet he was no happier than before. Of course, life was the same to him, because his nature had remained unchanged. What was the use of his being a man if he continued to feel and think like a dog? In fact, his troubles were increased 100-fold by the sense of responsibility that now weighed upon him. "Oh," he said with a sigh, for he was joining blindly in his little god's search, without for a moment reflecting that the end of the journey would mean the end of his life.
"Oh,"
he said,
"if I got hold of that rascal of a bluebird, trust me, I wouldn't touch him even with the tip of my tongue, not if he were as plump and as sweet as a quail."
Bread followed solemnly, carrying the cage. The two children came next, and Sugar brought up the rear. But where was the cat? To discover the reason of her absence, we must go a little way back and read her thoughts. At the time when Tylette called a meeting of the animals and things in the fairies' hall, she was contemplating a great plot which would aim at prolonging the journey. But she had reckoned without the stupidity of her hearers.
"The idiots,"
she thought,
"have very nearly spoiled the whole thing by foolishly throwing themselves at the fairies' feet as though they were guilty of a crime. It is better to rely on oneself alone. In my cat life, all our training is founded on suspicion. I can see that it is just the same in the life of men. Those who confide in others are only betrayed. It is better to keep silent and to be treacherous one's self."
As you see, my dear little readers, the cat was in the same position as the dog. She had not changed her soul and was simply continuing her former existence. But, of course, she was very wicked. Whereas our dear Tylo was, if anything, too good. Tylette therefore resolved to act on her own account and went, before daybreak, to call on Night, who was an old friend of hers. The road to the Palace of Night was rather long and rather dangerous. It had precipices on either side of it. You had to climb up and climb down and then climb up again among high rocks that always seemed waiting to crush the passers-by. At last you came to the edge of a dark circle, and there you had to go down thousands of steps to reach the black marble underground palace in which Night lived. The cat, who had often been there before, raced along the road, light as a feather. Her cloak, borne on the wind, streamed like a banner behind her. The plume in her hat fluttered gracefully, and her little grey kid boots hardly touched the ground. She soon reached her destination and, in a few bounds, came to the great hall where Night was. It was really a wonderful sight. Night, stately and grand as a queen, reclined upon her throne. She slept, and not a glimmer, not a star twinkled around her. But we know that the Night had no secrets for cats and that their eyes have the power of piercing the darkness. So Tylette saw Night as though it were broad daylight. Before waking her, she cast a loving glance at that motherly and familiar face. It was white and silvery as the moon, and its unbending features inspired both fear and admiration. Night's figure, which was half visible through her long black veils, was as beautiful as that of a Greek statue. She had long arms, and a pair of enormous wings, now furled in sleep, came from her shoulders to her feet and gave her a look of majesty beyond compare. Still, in spite of her affection for her best of friends, Tylette did not waste too much time in gazing at her. It was a critical moment, and time was short. Tired and jaded and overcome with anguish, she sank upon the steps of the throne and meowed plaintively.
"It is I, Mother of Night. I am worn out."
Night is of an anxious nature and easily alarmed. Her beauty, built up of peace and response, possesses the secret of silence, which life is constantly disturbing. A star shooting through the sky, a leaf falling to the ground, the hoot of an owl, a mere nothing, is enough to tear the black velvet pall which she spreads over the earth each evening. The cat, therefore, had not finished speaking when Night sat up, all quivering. Her immense wings beat around her and she questioned Tylette in a trembling voice. As soon as she had learned the danger that threatened her, she began to lament her fate. What? A man's son coming to her palace? And perhaps with the help of the magic diamond, discovering her secrets? What should she do? What would become of her? How could she defend herself? And, forgetting that she was sinning against the silence, her own particular god, Night began to utter piercing screams. It was true that falling into such a commotion was hardly likely to help her find a cure for her troubles. Likely for her, Tylette, who was accustomed to the annoyance and worries of human life, was better armed. She had worked out her plan when going ahead of the children, and she was hoping to persuade Night to adopt it. She explained this plan to her in a few words.
"I see only one thing for it, Mother Night. As they are children, we must give them such a fright that they will not dare to insist on opening the great door at the back of the hall, behind which the birds of the moon live, and generally the bluebird too. The secrets of the other caverns will be sure to scare them. The hope of our safety lies in the terror which you will make them feel."
There was clearly no other course to take. But Night had not time to reply, for she heard a sound. Then her beautiful features contracted, her wings spread out angrily, and everything in her attitude told Tylette that Night approved of her plan.
"Here they are!"
cried the cat. The little band came marching down the steps of Night's gloomy staircase. Tylô pranced bravely in front, whereas Tyltyl looked around him with an anxious glance. He certainly found nothing to comfort him. It was all very magnificent, but very terrifying. Picture a huge, wonderful black marble hall of a stern and tomb-like splendour. There is no ceiling visible, and the ebony pillars that surround the amphitheatre shoot up to the sky. It is only when you lift your eyes up there that you catch the faint light falling from the stars. Everywhere the thickest darkness reigns. Two restless flames, no more, flicker on either side of Night's throne. Before a monumental door of brass, bronze doors show through the pillars to the right and left. The cat rushed up to the children.
"This way, little master, this way. I have told Night, and she is delighted to see you."
Tylet's soft voice and smile made Tyltyl feel himself again, and he walked up to the throne with a bold and confident step, saying:
"Good day, Mrs. Night."
Night was offended by the word "good day," which reminded her of her eternal enemy, Light, and answered dryly:
"Good day? I'm not used to that. You might say good night, or at least good evening."
Our hero was not prepared to quarrel. He felt very small in the presence of that stately lady. He quickly begged her pardon as nicely as he could, and very gently asked her leave to look for the Blue Bird in her palace.
"I have never seen him. He is not here,"
exclaimed Night, flapping her great wings to frighten the boy. But when he insisted and gave no sign of fear, she herself began to dread the diamond, which, by lighting up her darkness, would completely destroy her power, and she thought it better to pretend to yield to an impulse of generosity and at once to point to the big key that lay on the steps of the throne. Without a moment's hesitation, Tyltyl seized hold of it and ran to the first door of the hall. Everybody shook with fright. Bread's teeth chattered in his head. Sugar, who was standing some way off, moaned with mortal anguish. Mytyl howled.
"Where is Sugar? I want to go home."
Meanwhile, Tyltyl, pale and resolute, was trying to open the door, while Night's grave voice, rising above the din, proclaimed the first danger.
"It's the ghosts!"
"Oh dear," thought Tyltyl.
"I have never seen a ghost. It must be awful."
The faithful Tylo by his side was panting with all his might, for dogs hate anything uncanny. At last the key grated in the lock. Silence reigned as dense and heavy as the darkness. No one dared draw a breath. Then the door opened, and in a moment the gloom was filled with white figures running in every direction. Some lengthened out right up to the sky. Others twined themselves round the pillars. Others wriggled ever so fast along the ground. They were something like men, but it was impossible to distinguish their features. The eye could not catch them. The moment you looked at them, they turned into a white mist. Tyltyl did his best to chase them, for Mrs. Night kept to the plan contrived by the cat and pretended to be frightened. She had been the ghost's friend for hundreds and hundreds of years and had only to say a word to drive them in again. But she was careful to do nothing of the sort, and, flapping her wings like mad, she called upon all her gods and screamed,
"Drive them away! Drive them away! Help! Help!"
But the poor ghosts, who hardly ever came out now that man no longer believed in them, were much too happy at taking a breath of air. And had it not been that they were afraid of Tylo, who tried to bite their legs, they would never have been put back indoors.
"Oof!"
gasped the dog when the door was shut at last.
"I have strong teeth, goodness knows, but chaps like those I never saw before. When you bite them, you'd think their legs were made of cotton."
By this time, Tyltyl was making for the second door and asking,
"What's behind this one?"
Night made a gesture as though to put him off. Did the obstinate little fellow really want to see everything?
"Must I be careful when I open it?"
asked Tyltyl.
"No!"
said Night.
"It is not worthwhile. It's the sicknesses. They are very quiet, the poor little things. Man, for some time, has been waging such war upon them. Open and see for yourself."
Tyltyl threw the door wide open and stood speechless with astonishment. There was nothing to be seen. He was just about to close the door again when he was hustled aside by a little body in a dressing gown and a cotton nightcap who began to frisk about the hall, wagging her head and stopping every minute to cough, sneeze and blow her nose, and to pull on her slippers, which were too big for her and kept dropping off her feet. Sugar, Bread and Tyltyl were no longer frightened and began to laugh like anything. But they had no sooner come near the little person in the cotton nightcap than they themselves began to cough and sneeze.
"It's the least important of the sicknesses,"
said Night.
"It's cold in the head. Oh dear! Oh dear!"
thought Sugar.
"If my nose keeps on running like this, I'm done for. I shall melt."
Poor Sugar! He did not know where to hide himself. He had become very much attached to life since the journey began, for he had fallen over head and ears in love with water, and yet this love caused him the greatest worry. Miss Water was a tremendous flirt, expected a lot of attention and was not particular with whom she mixed. But mixing too much with Water was an expensive luxury, as poor Sugar found to his cost, for at every kiss he gave her, he left a bit of himself behind, until he began to tremble for his life. When he suddenly found himself attacked by a cold in the head, he would have had to fly from the palace, but for the timely aid of our dear Tylô, who ran after the little minx and drove her back into her cavern, amidst the laughter of Tyltyl and Mytyl, who thought gleefully that, so far, the trial had not been very terrible. The boy therefore ran to the next door with still greater courage.
"Take care!"
cried Night in a dreadful voice.
"It's the wars! They are more powerful than ever. I daren't think what would happen if one of them broke loose. Stand ready, all of you, to push back the door."
Night had not finished uttering her warnings when the plucky little fellow repented his rashness. He tried in vain to shut the door which he had opened. An invincible force was pushing it from the other side. Streams of blood flowed through the cracks. Flames shot forth. Shouts, oaths and groans mingled with the roar of cannon and the rattle of musketry. Everything in the Palace of Night was running about in wild confusion. Bread and Sugar tried to take to flight, but could not find the way out, and they now came back to Tyltyl and put their shoulders to the door with despairing force. The cat pretended to be anxious, while secretly rejoicing.
"This may be the end of it,"
she said, curling her whiskers.
"They won't dare go on after this."
Dear Tylô made superhuman efforts to help his little master, while Mytyl stood crying in a corner. At last our hero gave a shout of triumph.
"Hooray! They're giving way! Victory! Victory! The door is shut!"
At the same time, he dropped on the steps, utterly exhausted, dabbing his forehead with his poor little hands, which shook with terror.
"Well?"
asked Night harshly.
"Have you had enough? Did you see them?"
Yes,
replied the little fellow, sobbing.
"They are hideous and awful. I don't think they have the bluebird." "You may be sure they haven't,"
answered Night angrily.
"If they had, they would eat him at once. You see, there is nothing to be done."
Tyltyl drew himself up proudly.
"I must see everything,"
he declared.
"Light said so." "It's an easy thing to say,"
retorted Night.
"when one's afraid and stays at home." "Let us go to the next door,"
said Tyltyl resolutely.
"What's in here?" "This is where I keep the shades and the terrors."
Tyltyl reflected for a minute.
"As far as shades go,"
he thought,
"Mrs. Night is poking fun at me. It's more than an hour since I've seen anything but shade in this house of hers, and I shall be very glad to see daylight again. As for the terrors, if they are anything like the ghosts, we shall have another good joke."
Our friend went to the door and opened it before his companions had time to protest. For that matter, they were all sitting on the floor, exhausted with the last fright, and they looked at one another in astonishment, glad to find themselves alive after such a scare. Meanwhile, Tyltyl threw back the door and nothing came out.
"There's no one there,"
he said.
"Yes, there it is! Yes, there is! Look out!"
said Night, who was still shamming fright. She was simply furious. She had hoped to make a great impression with her terrors, and, lo and behold, the wretches who had so long been snubbed by man were afraid of him. She encouraged them with kind words and succeeded in coaxing out a few tall figures covered in grey veils. They began to run all around the hall until, hearing the children laugh, they were seized with fear and rushed indoors again. The attempt had failed as far as Night was concerned, and the dread hour was about to strike. Already Tyltyl was moving towards the big door at the end of the hall. A few last words took place between them.
"Do not open that one,"
said Night in awe-struck tones.
"Why not?" "Because it's not allowed." "Then it's here that the bluebird is hidden." "Go no further. Do not tempt fate. Do not open that door."
"But why?" again asked Tyltyl obstinately. Thereupon, Night, irritated by his persistence, flew into a rage, hurled the most terrible threats at him, and ended by saying,
"No one of those who have opened it, were it by a hair's breadth, but have ever returned alive to the light of day. It means certain death, and all the horrors, all the terrors,
All the fears of which men speak on earth are as nothing compared with those which await if you insist on touching that door."
"Don't do it, master dear,"
said Bread with chattering teeth.
"Don't do it. Take pity on us. I implore you, on my knees."
"You are sacrificing the lives of all of us?"
Meowed the cat.
"I won't. I shan't."
Sobbed Myrtle.
"Pity, pity!"
Whined Sugar, wringing her fingers. All of them were weeping and crying. All of them crowded around Tyltyl. Dear Tylo alone, who respected his little master's wishes, dared not speak a word, though he fully believed that his last hour had come. 2 big tears rolled down his cheeks, and he licked Tyltyl's hands in despair. It was really a most touching scene, and for a moment our hero hesitated. His heart beat wildly, his throat was parched with anguish. He tried to speak and could not get out a sound. Besides, he did not wish to show weakness in the presence of his hapless companions.
"If I have not the strength to fulfill my task,"
he said to himself,
"who will fulfill it? If my friends behold my distress, it's all up to me. They will not let me go through with my mission, and I shall never find the Bluebird."
At this thought, the boy's heart leaped within his breast, and all his generous nature rose in rebellion. It would never do to be, perhaps, within arm's reach of happiness, and not to try for it, at the risk of dying in the attempt, to try for it and hand it over at last to all mankind. That settled it. Tyltyl resolved to sacrifice himself like a true hero. He brandished the heavy golden key and cried,
"I must open the door."
He ran up to the great door with Tylo panting by his side. The poor dog was half dead with fright, but his pride and his devotion to Tyltyl obliged him to smother his fears.
"I shall stay,"
he said to his master.
"I'm not afraid. I shall stay with my little god."
In the meantime, all the others had fled. Bread was crumbling to bits behind a pillar. Sugar was melting in a corner with Myrtle in his arms. Night and the cat, both shaking with fury, kept to the far end of the hall. Then Tyltyl gave Tylo a last kiss, pressed him to his heart, and with never a tremble put the key in the lock. Yells of terror came from all of the corners of the hall where the runaways had taken shelter, while the 2 leaves of the great door opened by magic in front of our little friend, who was struck dumb with admiration and delight. What an exquisite surprise! A wonderful garden lay before him, a dream garden filled with flowers that shone like stars, waterfalls that came rushing from the sky, and trees which the moon had clothed in silver. And then there was something whirling like a blue cloud among the clusters of roses. Tyltyl rubbed his eyes. He could not believe his senses. He waited, looked again, and then dashed into the garden, shouting like mad.
Come quickly! Come quickly! They are here! We have them at last! Millions of bluebirds! Thousands of millions! Come, Myrtle! Come, Tylo! Come all! Help me! You can catch them by the handfuls."
Reassured at last, his friends came running up and all darted in among the birds, seeing who could catch the most.
"I've caught 7 already!"
cried Myrtle.
"I can't hold them!"
"Nor can I,"
said Tyltyl.
"I have too many of them. They're escaping from my arms."
"Tylo has some too."
"Let us go out! Let us go! Light is waiting for us. How pleased she will be! This way! This way!"
And they all danced and scampered away in their glee, singing songs of triumph as they went. Night and the cat, who had not shared in the general rejoicing, crept back anxiously to the great door, and Night whimpered.
"Haven't they got him?" "No,"
said the cat, who saw the real bluebird perched high on a moonbeam.
"They could not reach him. He kept too high."
Our friends, all in a haste, ran up the numberless stairs between them and the daylight. Each of them hugged the birds which he had captured, never dreaming that every step which brought them nearer to the light was fatal to the poor things, so that by the time they came to the top of the staircase, they were carrying nothing but dead birds. Light was waiting for them anxiously.
"Well, have you caught him?"
she asked.
Yes, yes,"
said Tyltyl.
"Lots of them. There are thousands. Look!"
As he spoke, he held out the dear birds to her and saw, to his dismay, that they were nothing more than lifeless corpses. Their poor little wings were broken and their heads drooped sadly from their necks. The boy, in his despair, turned to his companions. Alas, they too were hugging nothing but dead birds. Then Tyltyl threw himself sobbing into Light's arms. Once more, all his hopes were dashed to the ground.
"Do not cry, my child,"
said Light.
"You did not catch the one that is able to live in broad daylight. We shall find him yet."
Of course, we shall find him,
said Bread and Sugar with one voice. They were great boobies, both of them, but they wanted to console the boy. As for friend Tylo, he was so much put out that he forgot his dignity for a moment and, looking at the dead birds, exclaimed,
"Are they good to eat, I wonder?"
The party set out to walk back and sleep in the Temple of Light. It was a melancholy journey. All regretted the peace of home and felt inclined to blame Tyltyl for his want of caution. Sugar edged up to Bread and whispered in his ear,
"Don't you think, Mr. Chairman, that all this excitement is very useless?"
And Bread, who felt flattered at receiving so much attention, answered pompously,
"Never you fear, my dear fellow. I shall put all this right. Life would be unbearable if we had to listen to all the whimsies of the little madcap. Tomorrow we shall stay in bed."
They forgot that, but for the boy at whom they were sneering, they would never have been alive at all, and that, if he had suddenly told Bread that he must go back to his pan to be eaten, and Sugar that he was to be cut into small lumps to sweeten Daddy Tyl's coffee and Mummy Tyl's syrups, they would have thrown themselves at their benefactor's feet and begged for mercy. In fact, they were incapable of appreciating their good luck until they were brought face to face with bad. Poor things! The Fairy Berylin, when making them a present of their human life, ought to have thrown in a little wisdom. They were not so much to blame, of course. They were only following man's example. Given the power of speaking, they jabbered. Knowing how to judge, they condemned. Able to feel, they complained. They had hearts which increased their sense of fear without adding to their happiness. As to their brains, which could easily have arranged all the rest, they made so little of them that they had already grown quite rusty. And if you could have opened their heads and looked at the works of their life inside, you would have seen the poor brains, which were their most precious possessions, jumping about at every movement they made and rattling in their empty skulls like dried peas in a pod. Fortunately, Light, thanks to her wonderful insight, knew all about their state of mind. She determined, therefore, to employ the elements and things no more than she was obliged to.
"They are useful," she thought, "to feed the children and amuse them on the way. But they must have no further share in the trials, because they have neither courage nor conviction."
Meanwhile, the party walked on. The road widened out and became resplendent. And at the end, the Temple of Light stood on a crystal height, shedding its beams around. The tired children made the dog carry them pick-a-back by turns, and they were almost asleep when they reached the shining steps. The end of Chapter 4, The Palace of Night. Read by Ian King. Chapter 5 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexandra Tirexa de Matos. Chapter 5. The Kingdom of the Future. Read by Ian King. Tyltyl and Mytyl woke up next morning feeling very gay with childish carelessness. They had forgotten their disappointment. Tyltyl was very proud of the compliments which Light had paid him. She seemed as happy as though he had brought the Bluebird with him. She said with a smile as she stroked the lad's dark curls,
"I am quite satisfied. You are such a good, brave boy that you will soon find what you are looking for."
Tyltyl did not understand the deep meaning of her words, but for all that he was very glad to hear them. And besides, Light had promised him that today he would have nothing to fear in their new expedition. On the contrary, he would meet millions and millions of little children who would show him the most wonderful toys of which no one on earth had the least idea. She also told him that he and his little sister would travel alone with her this time and that all the others would take a rest while they were gone. This is why, at the moment when our chapter opens, they all met in the underground vaults of the temple. Light thought it as well to lock up the elements and things. She knew that if they were left to do as they pleased, they might escape and get into mischief. It was not so very cruel of her, because the vaults of her temple are even lighter and lovelier than the upper floors of human houses. But you cannot get out without her leave. She alone has the power of widening, with a stroke of her wand, a little cleft in the emerald wall at the end of the passage, through which you go down a few crystal steps till you come to a sort of cave, all green and transparent, like a forest when the sunlight sweeps through its branches. Usually this great hall was quite empty, but now it had sofas in it and a gold table laid with fruits and cakes and creams and delicious wines, which Light's servants had just finished setting out. Light's servants were very odd. They always made the children laugh with their long white satin dresses and their little black caps with a flame at the top. They looked like lighted candles. Their mistress sent them away and then told the animals and things to be very good and asked if they would like some books and games to play with. They answered with a laugh that nothing amused them more than eating and sleeping and that they were very glad to stay where they were. Tylo, of course, did not share this view. His heart spoke louder than his greed of his laziness, and his great dark eyes turned in entreaty on Tyltyl, who would have been only too pleased to take his faithful companion with him, if Light had not absolutely forbidden it. "I can't help it," said the boy, giving him a kiss. "It seems that dogs are not admitted where we are going." Suddenly Tylo sprang up with delight. A great idea had struck him. He had not left his real doggy life long enough to forget any part of it, especially his troubles. Which was the greatest of these? Was it not the chain? What melancholy hours Tylo had spent fastened to an iron ring! And what humiliation he had endured when the woodcutter used to take him to the village and, with unspeakable silliness, keep him on the lead in front of everybody, thus depriving him of the pleasure of greeting his friends and sniffing the smells provided for his benefit at every street corner and in every gutter.
"Well,"
he said to himself,
"I shall have to submit to that humiliating torture once again to go with my little god."
Faithful to his traditions, he had, in spite of his fine clothes, kept his doggy collar, but not his lead. What was to be done? He was once more in despair when he saw Water lying on a sofa and playing, in an absent-minded sort of way, with her long strings and coral. He ran up to her as prettily as he could and, after paying her a heap of compliments, begged her to lend him her biggest necklace. She was in a good temper and not only did what he asked, but was kind enough to fasten the end of the coral string to his collar. Tylo gaily went up to his master, handing him this necklace chain, and kneeling at his feet, said,
"Take me with you like this, my little god. Men never say a word to a poor dog when he is on his chain."
"Alas, even like this you cannot come," said Light, who was much touched by this act of self-sacrifice, and, to cheer him up, she told him that fate would soon provide a trial for the children in which his assistance would be of great use. As she spoke these words, she touched the emerald wall, which opened to let her pass through with the children. Her chariot was waiting outside the entrance to the temple. It was a lovely shell of jade, inlaid with gold. They all three took their seats, and the two great white birds harnessed to it at once flew off through the clouds. The chariot travelled very fast, and they were not long on the road, much to the regret of the children, who were enjoying themselves and laughing like anything. But other and even more beautiful surprises awaited them. The clouds vanished around them, and suddenly they found themselves in a dazzling azure palace. Here all was blue. The light, the flagstones, the columns, the vaults, everything, down to the smallest objects, was of an intense and fairy-like blue. There was no seeing the end of the palace. The eyes were lost in the infinite sapphire vistas.
"How lovely it all is!"
said Tyltyl, who could not get over his astonishment.
"Goodness me, how lovely! Where are we?"
"We are in the kingdom of the future,"
said Light,
"in the midst of the children who are not yet born. As the diamond allows us to see clearly in this region which is hidden from men, we shall perhaps find the bluebird here. Look at the children running up."
From every side came bands of little children dressed from head to foot in blue. They had beautiful dark or golden hair and they were all exquisitely pretty. They shouted gleefully,
"Live children! Come and look at the little live children!
Come and look at the little live children!"
"Why do they call us the little live children?" asked Tyltyl of Light.
It is because they themselves are not alive yet. They are awaiting the hour of their birth. For it is from here that all the children come who are born upon our earth. When the fathers and mothers want children, the great doors which you see over there at the back are opened, and the little ones go down.
"What a lot there are! What a lot there are!" cried Tyltyl.
There are many more,
said Light.
No one could count them, but a little further you will see other things.
Tyltyl did as he was told and elbowed his way through. But it was difficult for him to move because a crowd of blue children pressed all around them. At last, by mounting on a step, our little friend was able to look over the throng of inquisitive heads and see what was happening in every part of the hall. It was most extraordinary. Tyltyl had never dreamed of anything like it. He danced with joy. And Mytyl, who was hanging on to him and standing on tiptoe so that she might see too, clapped her little hands and gave loud cries of wonder. All around were millions of children in blue, some playing, others walking about, others talking or thinking. Many were asleep. Many also were at work, and their instruments, their tools, the machines which they were building, the plants, the flowers and the fruits which they were growing or gathering were of the same bright and heavenly blue as the general appearance of the palace. Among the children moved tall persons also dressed in blue. They were very beautiful and looked like angels. They came up to Light and smiled and gently pushed aside the blue children, who went back quietly to what they were doing, though still watching our friends with astonished eyes. One of them, however, remained standing close to Tyltyl. He was quite small. From under his long sky-blue silk dress peeped two little pink and dimpled bare feet. His eyes stared in curiosity at the little live boy, and he went up to him as though in spite of himself. "May I talk to him?" asked Tyltyl, who felt half glad and half frightened.
"Certainly,"
said Light.
"You must make friends. I will leave you alone. You will be more at ease by yourselves."
So saying, she went away and left the two children face to face, shyly smiling. Suddenly they began to talk. "How do you do?" said Tyltyl, putting out his hand to the child. But the child did not understand what that meant and stood without moving. "What's that?" continued Tyltyl, touching the child's blue dress. The child, who was absorbed in what he was looking at, did not answer, but gravely touched Tyltyl's hat with his finger. "And that?" he lisped. That's my hat," said Tyltyl. "Have you no hat?" "No, what is it for?" asked the child. "It's to say, 'How do you do?' with," Tyltyl answered. "And then for when it's cold." "What does that mean, when it's cold?" asked the child. "When you shiver like this," brrr, brrr, said Tyltyl. "And when you go like this with your arms," vigorously beating his arms across his chest. "Is it cold on earth?" asked the child. "Yes, sometimes in winter, where there is no fire." "Why is there no fire?" "Because it's expensive and it costs money to buy wood." The child looked at Tyltyl again as though he did not understand a word that Tyltyl was saying, and Tyltyl in his turn looked amazed. "It's quite clear that he knows nothing of the most everyday things," thought our hero, while the child stared with no small respect at the little live boy who knew everything. Then he asked Tyltyl what money was. "Why, it's what you pay with," said Tyltyl, scorning to give any further explanation. "Oh," said the child seriously. Of course he did not understand. How could he know? A little boy like that, who lived in a paradise where his least wishes were granted before he had learned to put them into words. "How old are you?" asked Tyltyl, continuing the conversation. "I am going to be born soon," said the child. "I shall be born in 12 years. Is it nice to be born?" "Oh, yes," cried Tyltyl without thinking. "It's great fun." But he was very much at a loss when the little boy asked him how he managed. His pride did not allow him to be ignorant of anything in another child's presence, and it was quite droll to see him with his hands in his breeches pockets, his legs wide apart, his face upturned and his whole attitude that of a man who is in no hurry to reply. At last he answered with a shrug of the shoulders. "Upon my word, I can't remember. It's so long ago." "They say it's lovely, the earth
And the live people,
remarked the child.
Yes, it's not bad,
said Tyltyl.
There are birds and cakes and toys. Some have them all, but those who have none can look at the others.
This reflection shows us the whole character of our little friend. He was proud and inclined to be rather high and mighty, but he was never envious, and his generous nature made up to him for his poverty by allowing him to allow the good fortune of others. The two children talked a good deal more, but it would take too long to tell you all they said, because what they said was sometimes only interesting to themselves. After a while, Light, who was watching them from a distance, hurried up to them, a little anxious. Tyltyl was crying. Big tears came rolling down his cheeks and falling on his smart coat. She understood that he was talking of his grandmother and that he could not keep back his tears at the thought of the love which he had lost. He was turning away his head to hide his feelings, but the inquisitive child kept asking him questions.
Do the grannies die? What does that mean, dying? They go away one evening and do not come back. Has yours gone?
Yes, said Tyltyl.
Yes, she was very kind to me.
And at these words the poor little fellow began to cry again. The blue child had never seen anyone cry. He lived in a world where grief did not exist. His surprise was great, and he exclaimed,
What's the matter with your eyes? Are they making pearls?
To him, those tears were wonderful things.
No, it's not
pearls, said Tyltyl sheepishly.
What is it then?
But our poor friend would not admit what he looked upon as a weakness. He rubbed his eyes awkwardly and put everything down to the dazzling blue of the palace. The puzzled child insisted.
What's that falling down? Nothing. It's a little water,
said Tyltyl impatiently, hoping to cut short the explanation. But that was out of the question. The child was very obstinate, touched Tyltyl's cheeks with his fingers and asked in a tone of curiosity.
Does it come from the eyes?
Yes,
sometimes when one cries. What does that mean, crying?
Asked the child.
I have not been crying,
said Tyltyl proudly.
It's the fault of that blue. But if I had cried, it would be the same thing. Do you often cry on earth?
Not little boys, but little girls do. Don't you cry here?
No, I don't know how.
Well, you will learn. At that moment, a great breath of wind made him turn his head, and he saw, at a few steps away from him, a large piece of machinery which he had not noticed at first, as he was taken up with his interest in the little child. It was a grand and magnificent thing, but I cannot tell you its name, because the inventions of the kingdoms of the future will not be christened by man until they reach the earth. I can only say that Tyltyl, when he looked at it, thought that the enormous azure wings that whizzed so swiftly before his eyes were like the windmills in his part of the world, and that if he ever found the blue bird, its wings would certainly be no more delicate, dainty or dazzling. Full of admiration, he asked his new acquaintance what they were.
Those,
said the child.
That's for the invention which I shall make on earth.
And seeing Tyltyl stare with wide open eyes, he added,
When I am on earth, I shall have to invent the things that gives happiness. Would you like to see it? It is over there, between those two columns.
Tyltyl turned around to look, but all the children at once rushed at him, shouting,
No, come and see mine. No, mine is much finer.
No, come and see mine.
Mine is wonderful invention.
No,
mine is made of sugar.
His is no good. I'm bringing a light which nobody knows of.
And so saying, the last child lit himself up entirely with a most extraordinary flame. Amid these joyous exclamations, the live children were dragged towards the blue workshops, where each of the little inventors set his machine going. It was a great blue whirl of discs and pulleys and straps and fly wheels and driving wheels and cog wheels and all kinds of wheels, which sent every sort of machine skimming over the ground or shooting up to the ceiling. Other blue children unfolded maps and plans, or opened great big books, or uncovered azure statues, or bought enormous flowers and gigantic fruits that seemed made of sapphire and turquoises. Our little friends stood with their mouths wide open and their hands clasped together. They thought themselves in paradise. Mytyl bent over to look at a huge flower and laughed into its cup, which covered up her head like a hood of blue silk. A pretty child with dark hair and thoughtful eyes held it by the stalk and said proudly,
The flowers will all grow like that when I am on the earth. When will that be?
Asked Tyltyl.
In 53 years, 4 months and 9 days.
Next came 2 blue children, bending under the weight of a pole from which there was slung a bunch of grapes, each larger than a pear.
A bunch of pears,
cried Tyltyl.
No, they are grapes,
said the child.
They will all be like that when I am 30. I have found the way.
Tyltyl would have loved to taste them, but another child came along, almost hidden under a basket which one of the tall persons was helping him to carry. His fair-haired, rosy face smiled through the leaves that hung over the wicker work.
Look,
he said.
Look at my apples.
But those are melons, said Tyltyl.
No,
said the child.
They are my apples. They will all be alike when I am alive. I have discovered the process.
I should never finish if I were to try and describe to my little readers all the wonderful and incredible things that appeared before our hero's eyes. But suddenly a loud burst of laughter rang through the hall. A child had spoken of the king of the 9 planets, and Tyltyl, very much puzzled and perplexed, looked on every side. All the faces, bright with laughter, were turned to some spot which Tyltyl could not see. Every finger pointed in the same direction, but our friend looked in vain. They had spoken of a king. He was looking for a throne with a tall, dignified personage on it, wielding a golden sceptre.
Over there.
Lower down. Behind you.
Over there.
Behind you, said 1,000 little voices together.
But where is the king?
Where is the king? Tyltyl and Mytyl repeated, greatly interested. Then suddenly a loud and more serious voice sounded above the silvery murmur of the others.
Here I am,
it said proudly. And at the same time Tyltyl discovered a chubby baby which he had not yet remarked, for it was the smallest and had kept out of the way till then, sitting at the foot of a column in an attitude of indifference, seemingly wrapped in contemplation. The little king was the only one who had taken no notice of the live children. His beautiful liquid eyes as blue as the palace, were pursuing endless dreams. His right hand supported his head, which was already heavy with thought. His short tunic showed his dimpled knees, and a golden crown rested on his yellow locks. When he cried, "Here I am!" the baby rose from the step on which he was sitting and tried to climb onto it at one stride. But he was still so awkward that he lost his balance and he fell upon his nose. He at once picked himself up with so much dignity that nobody dared make fun of him. And this time he scrambled up on all fours and then, putting his legs wide apart, stood and eyed Tyltyl from top to toe.
"You're not very big,"
said Tyltyl, doing his best to keep from laughing.
"I shall do great things when I am,"
retorted the king in a tone that admitted of no reply.
"And what will you do?"
asked Tyltyl.
"I shall found the General Confederation of the Solar Planets,"
said the king in a very pompous voice. Our friend was so much impressed that he could not find a word to say, and the king continued.
"All the planets will belong to it, except Uranus, Saturn and Neptune, which are so ridiculously far away."
Thereupon he toddled off the step again and resumed his first attitude, showing that he had said all that he meant to say. Tyltyl left him to his meditations. He was eager to know as many more of the children as he could. He was introduced to the discovery of a new sun, to the inventor of a new joy, to the hero who was to wipe out injustice from the earth, and to the wiseacre who was to conquer death. There were such lots and lots of them that it would take days and days to name them all. Our friend was rather tired and was beginning to feel bored when his attention was suddenly aroused by hearing a child's voice calling him.
"Tyltyl, Tyltyl, how are you? Tyltyl, how are you?"
A little blue child came running up from the back of the hall, pushing his way through the crowd. He was fair and slim and bright-eyed and had a great look of Mytyl.
"How do you know my name?"
asked Tyltyl.
"It's not surprising,"
said the blue child,
"considering that I shall be your brother."
This time the live children were absolutely amazed. What an extraordinary meeting! They must certainly tell Mummy as soon as they got back. How astonished they would be at home! While they were making these reflections, the child went on to explain.
"I am coming to you next year on Palm Sunday," he said.
And he put 1,000 questions to his big brother. Was it comfortable at home? Was the food good? Was Daddy very severe? And Mummy?
"Oh, Mummy is so kind,"
said the little ones. And they asked him questions in their turn. What was he going to do on earth? What was he bringing?
"I am bringing 3 illnesses,"
said the little brother.
"Scarlatini, whooping cough and measles."
"Oh, that's all, is it?" cried Tyltyl. He shook his head with evident disappointment, while the other continued. "After that I shall leave you. It will hardly be worth while coming," said Tyltyl, feeling rather vexed. "We can't pick and choose," said the little brother pettishly. They would perhaps have quarrelled without waiting till they were on earth, if they had not suddenly been parted by a swarm of blue children who were hurrying to meet somebody. At the same time there was a great noise, as if thousands of invisible doors were being opened at the end of the galleries. "What's the matter?" asked Tyltyl.
"It's time."
"It's time," said one of the blue children.
"He's going to open the doors."
And the excitement increased on every side. The children left their machines and their labours. Those who were asleep woke up, and every eye was eager and anxiously turned to the great opal doors at the back, while every mouth repeated the same name. The word "Time! Time!" was heard all around, and the great mysterious noise kept on. Tyltyl was dying to know what it meant. At last he caught a little child by the skirt of his dress and asked him.
"Let me be,"
said the child very uneasily.
"I'm in a hurry. It may be my turn today. It is the dawn rising. This is the hour when the children who are to be born today go to earth. You shall see. Time is drawing the bolts."
"Who is Time?" asked Tyltyl.
"An old man who comes to call those who are going,"
said another child.
"He is not so bad, but he won't listen or hear. Beg as they may, if it's not their turn, he pushes back all those who try to go. Let me be. It may be my turn now."
Light now hastened towards our little friends in a great state of alarm.
"I was looking for you,"
she said.
"Come, quick. It will never do for Time to discover you."
As she spoke these words, she threw her gold cloak around the children and dragged them to the corner of the hall where they could see everything without being seen. Tyltyl was very glad to be so well protected. He now knew that he who was about to appear possessed so great and tremendous a power that no human strength was capable of resisting him. He was at the same time a deity and an ogre. He bestowed life and he devoured it. He sped through the world so fast that you had no time to see him. He ate and ate without stopping. He took whatever he touched. In Tyltyl's family he had already taken Grandad and Granny, the little brothers, the little sisters and the old blackbird. He did not mind what he took, joys and sorrows, winters and summers. All was fish that came to his net. Knowing this, our friend was astonished to see everybody in the kingdom of the future running so fast to meet him.
"I suppose he doesn't eat anything here,"
he thought. There he was! The great doors turned slowly on their hinges. There was a distant music. It was the sounds of the earth. A red and green light penetrated into the hall, and Time appeared on the threshold. He was a tall and very thin old man, so old that his wrinkled face was all grey, like dust. His white beard came down to his knees. In one hand he carried an enormous scythe, in the other an hourglass. Behind him, some way out on a sea of the colours of the dawn, was a magnificent gold galley with white sails.
"Are they ready? Whose hour has struck?"
asked Time. At the sound of that voice, solemn and deep as a bronze gong, thousands of bright children's voices, like the little silver bells, answered,
"Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are!
Here we are! Here we are!"
And in a moment, the blue children were crowding around the tall old man, who pushed them all back, and in a gruff voice said,
"One at a time. Once again, there are many more of you than are wanted. You can't deceive me."
Brandishing his scythe on one hand and holding out his cloak with the other, he barred the way to the rash children who tried to slip by him. Not one of them escaped the horrid old man's watchful eye.
"It's not your turn,"
he said to one.
"You're to be born tomorrow. Nor yours either. You've got 10 years to wait. A 13th shepherd? There are only 12 wanted. There is no need for more. More doctors? There are too many already. They are grumbling about it on the earth. And where are the engineers? They want an honest man. Only one, as a wonderful being."
Thereupon a poor child who was hung back until then came forward timidly, sucking his thumb. He looked pale and sad and walked with tottering footsteps. He was so wretched that even Time felt a moment's pity.
"It's you!"
he exclaimed.
"You seem to be a very poor specimen."
And in a moment the blue children were crowding around the tall old man, and lifting his eyes to the sky with a look of discouragement, he added,
"You won't live long."
And the moment went on. Each child, when denied, returned to his employment with a downcast air. When one of them was accepted, the others looked at him with envy. Now and then something happened, as when the hero who was to fight against the injustice refused to go, he clung to his playfellows, who called out to Time.
"He doesn't want to, sir. No, I don't want to go,"
cried the little fellow with all his might.
"I would rather not be born."
And quite right too, thought Tyltyl, who was full of common sense and knew what things are like on earth. For people always get beatings which they have not deserved, and when they have done wrong, you may be sure that the punishments will fall on one of their innocent friends.
"I wouldn't care to be in his place,"
said our friend to himself.
"I would rather hunt for the bluebird any day."
Meanwhile, the little seeker after justice went away, sobbing, frightened out of his life by Mr. Time. The excitement was now at its height. The children ran all over the hall. Those who were going packed up their inventions. Those who were staying behind had 1,000 requests to make.
"Will you write to me?
Will you write to me?
They say one can't."
"Oh, try, do try."
"Do try." "Announce my idea." "Goodbye, Jing." "Goodbye, Piri." "Goodbye, Jing." "Have you forgotten anything?" "Don't lose your ideas." "Try to tell us if it's nice."
Enough! Enough!
roared Time in a huge voice, shaking his big keys and his terrible scythe.
Enough! The anchor's weighed."
Then the children climbed onto the gold galley with the beautiful white silk sails. They waved their hands again to the little friends whom they were leaving behind them. But on seeing the earth in the distance, they cried out gladly,
"Earth, earth, earth, I can see it! I can see it! How bright it is! How big it is! How big it is!"
And at the same time, as though coming from the abyss, a song rose, a distant song of gladness and expectation. Light, who was listening with a smile, saw the look of astonishment on Tyltyl's face and bent over him.
"It is the song of the mothers coming out to meet them,"
she said. At that moment, Time, who had shut the doors, saw our friends and rushed at them angrily, shaking his scythe at them.
"Hurry,"
said Light.
"Hurry! Take the bluebird, Tyltyl, and go in front of me with Mytyl."
She put into the boy's arms a bird which she held hidden under her cloak, and all radiant, spreading her dazzling veil with her 2 hands. She ran on, protecting her charges from the onslaught of Time. In this way they passed through several turquoise and sapphire galleries. It was magnificently beautiful, but they were in the kingdom of the future, where Time was the great master, and they must escape from his anger which they had braved. Mytyl was terribly frightened, and Tyltyl kept nervously turning around to Light.
"Don't be afraid,"
she said.
"I am the only person Time has respected since the world began. Only mind that you take care of the bluebird. He's gorgeous. He is quite blue."
This thought entrapped the boy. He felt the precious treasure fluttering in his arms. His hands dared not press the pretty creature's soft, warm wings, and his heart beat against its heart. This time he held the bluebird. Nothing could touch it, because it was given to him by Light herself. What a triumph when he returned home! He was so bewildered by his happiness that he hardly knew where he was going. His joy rang a victorious peal in his head that made him feel giddy, and he was mad with pride, and this, worse luck, made him lose his coolness and his presence of mind. They were just about to cross the threshold of the palace when a gust of wind swept through the entrance hall, lifting up Light's veil and at last revealing the 2 children to the eyes of Time, who was still pursuing them. With a roar of rage, he darted his scythe at Tyltyl, who cried out. Light warded off the blow, and the door of the palace closed behind them with a thud. They were saved. But alas, Tyltyl, taken by surprise, had opened his arms, and now through his tears saw the bluebird of the future soaring above their heads, mingling with the azure sky, its dream wings so blue, so light, and so transparent that soon the boy could make out nothing more. Chapter 5 of The Bluebird, the Kingdom of the Future, read by Ian King.
Chapter 6 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bluebird for Children by Georges Leblanc, translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 6 In the Temple of Light. Tyltyl had enjoyed himself thoroughly in the kingdom of the future. He had seen many wonderful things and thousands of little playfellows, and then, without taking the least pains or trouble, had found the bluebird in his arms in the most magical way. He had never pictured anything more beautiful, nor blue or brilliant, and he still felt it fluttering against his heart, and kept hugging his arms to his breast as though the bluebird were there. Alas, it had vanished like a dream! He was thinking sadly of this latest disappointment as he walked hand in hand with Light. They were back in the temple, and were going to the vaults where the animals and things had been shut up. What a sight met their eyes! The wretches had eaten and drunk such a lot that they were lying on the floor quite tipsy. Tylô himself had lost all his dignity. He had rolled under the table and was snoring like a porpoise. His instinct remained, and the sound of the door made him prick up his ears. He opened one eye, but his sight was troubled by all that he had had a drink, and he did not know his little master when he saw him. He dragged himself to his feet with a great effort, turned round several times, and then dropped on the floor again with a grunt of satisfaction. Brett and the others were as bad, and the only exception was the cat, who was sitting up prettily on a marble and gold bench and seemed in full possession of her senses. She sprang nimbly to the ground and stepped up to Tylô with a smile. "I have been longing to see you," she said, "for I have been very unhappy among all these vulgar people. They first drank all the wine, and then started shouting and singing and dancing, quarrelling and fighting, and making such a noise that I was very glad when at last I fell into a tipsy sleep." The children praised her warmly for her good behavior. As a matter of fact, there was no great merit in this, for she could not stand anything stronger than milk. But we are seldom rewarded when by rights we ought to be, and sometimes are when we have not deserved it. After fondly kissing the children, Tilly asked a favor of Light. "I've had such a wretched time," she whined. "Let me go out for a while. It would do me good to be alone." Light gave her consent without suspecting anything, and the cat at once dragged her cloak around her, put her head straight, pulled up her soft grey boots over her knees, opened the door, and ran and bounded out into the forest. We shall know a little later where treacherous Tilly was going so gaily, and what was the horrid plot which she was mysteriously concocting. As on the other days, the children had their dinner with Light in a large room, all encrusted with diamonds. The servants bustled around them, smiling, and brought delicious dishes and cakes. After dinner, our little friends began to yawn. They felt sleepy very early after all their adventures. And Light, ever kind and thoughtful, made them live as they were accustomed to on earth. So as not to injure their health by altering their habits, she had set up their little beds in a part of the temple where the darkness would seem like night to them. They went through any number of rooms to reach their bedroom. They had first to pass all the lights known to men, and then those which men did not yet know. There were great sumptuous apartments in splendid marble, lit up by rays so wide and strong that the children were quite dazzled. "That is the light of the rich," said Light to Tylô. "You see how dangerous it is. People run the risk of going blind when they live too much in its ray, which leave no room for soft and kindly shade." And she hurried them on so that they might rest their eyes in the gentle light of the pool. Here the children suddenly felt as if they were in their parents' cottage, where everything was so humble and peaceful. The faint light was very pure and clear, but always flickering and ready to go out at the least breath. Next they came to the beautiful light of the ports, which they liked immensely, for it had all the colours of the rainbow, and when you passed through it, you saw lovely pictures, lovely flowers, and lovely toys, which you were unable to take hold of. Laughing merrily, the children ran after birds and butterflies, but everything faded away as soon as it was touched. "Well, I never!" said Tylô as he came panting back to Light. "This beats everything. I can't understand it." "You will understand later," she replied, "and if you understand it properly, you will be among the very few human beings who know the bluebird when they see him." After leaving the region of the ports, our friends reached the light of the learned, which lies on the borders of the known and the unknown lights. "Let's get on," said Tylô. "This is boring." To tell the truth, he was a little bit frightened, for they were in a long row of cold and forbidding arches, which were struck at every moment by dazzling lightning flashes. And at each flash you saw out-of-the-way things that had no name as yet, After these arches, they came to the lights unknown to men. And Tyltyl, in spite of the sleep that pressed upon his eyelids, could not help admiring the hall with its violet columns and the gallery with its red rays. And the violet of the columns was such a dark violet, and the red of the rays such a pale red, that it was hardly possible to see either of them. At last they arrived at the room of smooth, unflecked black light, which men call darkness because their eyes are not yet able to make it out. And here the children fell asleep without delay on 2 soft beds of clouds. End of chapter 6.
Chapter 7 of The Blue Bird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Blue Bird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 7. When the children were not going on an expedition, they played about in the realms of light, and this was a great treat for them, for the gardens and the country around the temple were as wonderful as the halls and galleries of silver and gold. The leaves of some of the plants were so broad and strong that they were able to lie down on them, and, when a breath of wind stirred the leaves, the children swung as in a hammock. It was always summer there, and never a moment was darkened by the night. But the hours were known by their different colors. There were pink, white, blue, lilac, green, and yellow hours. And according to their hues, the flowers, the fruits, the birds, the butterflies, and the scents changed, causing Tyltyl and Mytyl a constant surprise. They had all the toys that they could wish for. When they were tired of playing, they stretched themselves out on the backs of the lizards, which were as long and wide as little boats, and quickly raced round the garden path, over the sand which was as white and as good to eat as sugar. When they were thirsty, Water shook her tresses into the cup of the enormous flowers, and the children drank straight out of the lilies, tulips, and morning glories. If they were hungry, they picked radiant fruits which revealed the taste of light to them, and which had juice that shone like the rays of the sun. There was also, in a clump of bushes, a white marble pond which possessed a magical power. Its clear waters reflected not the faces, but the souls of those who looked into it. "It's a ridiculous invention," said the cat, who steadily refused to go near the pond. "You, my dear little readers, who know her thoughts as well as I do, will not be surprised at her refusal, and you will also understand why our faithful Tylô was not afraid to go and quench his thirst there. He need not fear to reveal his thoughts, for he was the only creature whose soul never altered. The dear dog had no feelings but those of love and kindness and devotion. When Tyltyl bent over the magic mirror, he almost always saw the picture of a splendid bluebird, for the constant wish to find him filled his mind entirely. Then he would run to Light and entreat her, "Tell me where he is! You know everything! Tell me where to find him!" But she replied, in a tone of mystery, "I cannot tell you anything. You must find him for yourself." And kissing him, she added, "Cheer up, you are getting nearer to him at each trial." Now there came a day on which she said to him, "I have received a message from the fairy Bérylune, telling me that the bluebird is probably hidden in the graveyard. It appears one of the dead in the graveyard is keeping him in his tomb." "What shall we do?" asked Tyltyl. "It is very simple. At midnight you will turn the diamond, and you shall see the dead come out of the ground." At these words, Milk, Water, Bread, and Sugar began to yell and scream and chatter their teeth. "Don't mind them," said Light to Tyltyl in a whisper. "They are afraid of the dead." "I'm not afraid of them," said Fire, frisking about. "Time was when I used to burn them. That was much more amusing than nowadays." "Oh, I feel like I'm going to turn," wailed Milk. "I'm not afraid," said the dog, trembling in every limb. "But if you run away, I shall run away too, and with the greatest pleasure." The cat sat pulling at her whiskers. "I know what's what," she said in her usual mysterious way. "Be quiet," said Light. "The fairy gave strict orders. You are all to stay with me at the gate of the graveyard. The children are to go on alone." Tyltyl felt anything but pleased. He asked, "Aren't you coming with us?" "No," said Light. "The time for that has not arrived. Light cannot yet enter among the dead. Besides, there is nothing to fear. I shall not be far away, and those who love me and whom I love always find me again." She had not finished speaking when everything around the children changed. The wonderful temple, the dazzling flowers, the splendid gardens vanished to make way for a poor little country cemetery which lay in the soft moonlight. Near the children were a number of graves, grassy mounds, wooden crosses, and tombstones. Tyltyl and Mytyl were seized with terror and hugged each other. "I am frightened," said Mytyl. "I am never frightened," stammered Tyltyl, who was shaking with fear but did not like to say so. "I say," asked Mytyl, "are the dead wicked?" "Why, no," said Tyltyl. "They're not alive." "Have you ever seen one?" "Yes, once long ago, when I was very young." "What was it like?" "Quite white, very still and very cold, and it didn't talk." "Are we going to see them?" Tyltyl shuddered at this question and made an unsuccessful effort to steady his voice as he answered. "Why, of course, Light said so." "Where are the dead?" asked Mytyl. Tyltyl cast a frightened look around him, for the children had not dared to stir since they were alone. "The dead are here," he said, "under the grass or under those big stones." "Are those the doors of their houses?" asked Mytyl, pointing to the tombstones. "Yes." "Do they go out when it's fine?" "They can only go out at night." "Why?" "Because they are in their nightshirts." "Do they go out also when it rains?" "When it rains, they stay at home." "Is it nice in their homes?" "They say it's very cramped." "Have they any children?" "Why, yes, they have all those who die." "And what do they live on?" Tyltyl stopped to think before answering. As Mytyl's big brother, he felt it his duty to know everything, but her questions often puzzled him. Then he reflected that, as the dead live underground, they can hardly eat anything that is above it, and so he answered very positively. "They eat roots." Mytyl was quite satisfied, and returned to the great question that was occupying her little mind. "Shall we see them?" she asked. "Of course," said Tyltyl. "We see everything when I turn the diamond." "And what will they say?" Tyltyl began to grow impatient. "They will say nothing, as they don't talk." "Why don't they talk?" asked Mytyl. "Because they have nothing to say," said Tyltyl, more cross and perplexed than ever. "Why have they nothing to say?" This time the little big brother lost all patience. He shrugged his shoulders, gave Mytyl a push, and shouted angrily, "You're a nuisance!" Mytyl was greatly upset and confused. She sucked her thumb and resolved to hold her tongue forever after, as she had been so badly treated. But a breath of wind made the leaves of the trees whisper and suddenly recalled the children to their fears and their sense of loneliness. They hugged each other tight and began to talk again, so as not to hear the horrible silence. "When will you turn the diamond?" asked Mytyl. "You heard Light say that I was to wait until midnight, because that disturbs them less. It is when they come out to take the air." "Isn't it midnight yet?" Tyltyl turned around, saw the church clock, and hardly had the strength to answer, for their hands were just upon the hour. "Listen," he stammered. "Listen. Is it just going to strike? There, do you hear?" And the clock struck 12. Then Mytyl, frightened out of her life, began to stamp her feet and utter piercing screams. "I want to go away! I want to go away!" Tyltyl, though stiff with fright, was able to say, "Not now. I am going to turn the diamond." "No, no, no!" cried Mytyl. "I am so afraid, little brother! Don't do it! I want to go away!" Tyltyl vainly tried to lift his hand. He could not reach the diamond with Mytyl clinging to him, hanging with all her weight on her brother's arm and screaming at the top of her voice. "I don't want to see the dead! They will be awful! I can't possibly! I'm much too frightened!" Poor Tyltyl was quite as much terrified as Mytyl, but at each trial his will and courage were becoming greater. He was learning to master himself, and nothing could induce him to fail in his mission. The 11th stroke rang out. "The hour is passing!" he exclaimed. "It is time!" And releasing himself resolutely from Mytyl's arms, he turned the diamond. A moment of terrible silence followed for the poor little children. Then they saw the crosses totter, the mounds open, the slabs rise up. Mytyl hid her face against Tyltyl's chest. "They're coming out!" she cried. "There! There! There! There!" The agony was more than the plucky little fellow could endure. He shut his eyes and only kept himself from fainting by leaning against a tree beside him. He remained like that for a moment that seemed to him like a century, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. Then he heard birds singing. A warm and scented breeze fanned his face, and on his hands, on his neck, he felt the soft heat of the balmy summer sun. Now, quite reassured, but unable to believe in so great a miracle, he opened his eyes and at once began to shout with happiness and admiration. From all the open tombs came thousands of splendid flowers. They spread everywhere, on the paths, on the trees, on the grass, and they went up and up until it seemed that they would touch the sky. They were great full-blown roses, showing their hearts, wonderful golden hearts, from which came the hot, bright rays which had wrapped Tyltyl in that summer warmth. Round the roses birds sang and bees buzzed gaily. "I can't believe it! It's not possible!" said Tyltyl. "What has become of the tombs and the stone crosses?" Dazzled and bewildered, the two children walked hand in hand through the graveyard, of which not a trace remained, for there was nothing but a wonderful garden on each side. They were as glad and happy as could be, after their terrible fright. They had thought that ugly skeletons would rise from the earth and run after them, pulling horrid faces. They had imagined all sorts of awful things. And now, in the presence of the truth, they saw that all that they had been told was a great big story, and that death did not exist. They saw that there are no dead, and that life goes on always, always, but under fresh forms. The fading rose sheds its pollen, which gives birth to other roses, and its scattered petals scent the air. The fruits come when the blossoms fall from the trees, and the dingy, hairy caterpillar turns into a brilliant butterfly. Nothing perishes, there are only changes. Beautiful birds circled all around Tyltyl and Mytyl. There were no blue ones among them, but the two children were so glad of their discovery that they asked for nothing more. Astonished and delighted, they kept on repeating, "There are no dead! There are no dead!"
End of chapter 7.
Chapter 8 of The Bluebird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Marianne. The Bluebird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 8. The Forest. As soon as Tyltyl and Mytyl were in bed, Light kissed them, and faded away at once, so as not to disturb their sleep with the rays that always streamed from her beautiful self. It must have been about midnight when Tyltyl, who was dreaming of the little blue children, felt a soft velvet paw pass to and fro over his face. He was surprised, and sat up in bed in a bit of a fright, but he was soon reassured when he saw his friend Tylet's glowing eyes glittering in the dark. "Hush!" said the cat in his ear. "Hush! Don't wake anybody. If we can arrange to slip out without being seen, we shall catch the Bluebird to-night. I have risked my life, oh my dearest master, in preparing a plan which will certainly lead us to victory." "But," said the boy, kissing Tylette, "Light would be so glad to help us, and besides, I should be ashamed to disobey her." "If you tell her," said the cat sharply, "all is lost. Believe me. Do as I say, and the day is ours." As she spoke these words, she hastened to dress him and also Mytyl, who had heard a noise and was asking to go with them. "You don't understand," groaned Tyltyl. "You are too small. You don't know what a wicked thing we are doing." But the treacherous cat answered all his arguments, saying that the reason why he had not found the Bluebird so far was just the fault of Light, who always brought brightness with her. Let the children only go hunting by themselves, in the dark, and they would soon find all the bluebirds that make men's happiness. The traitress displayed such cleverness that, before long, Tyltyl's disobedience became a very fine thing in his own eyes. Each of Tylet's words provided a good excuse for his action or adorned it with a generous thought. He was too weak to set his will against trickery, allowed himself to be persuaded, and walked out of the temple with a firm and cheerful step. Poor little fellow! If he could only have foreseen the terrible trap that awaited him! Our 3 companions set out across the fields in the white light of the moon. The cat seemed greatly excited, did nothing but talk, and went so fast that the children were hardly able to keep up with her. "This time," she declared, "we shall have the Bluebird. I am sure of it. I asked all the trees in the oldest forest. They know him, and he hides among them. Then, in order to have everybody there, I sent the rabbit to beat the assembly and call the principal animals in the country." They reached the edge of the dark forest in an hour's time. Then, at a turn in the road, they saw, in the distance, someone who seemed to be hurrying towards them. Tylette arched her back. She felt that it was her old enemy. She quivered with rage. Was he once more going to thwart her plans? Had he guessed her secret? Was he coming, at the last moment, to save the children's lives? She leaned over to Tyltyl and whispered to him in her most honeyed voice: "I am sorry to say it is our worthy friend the dog. It is 1,000 pities, because his presence will make us fail in our object. He is on the worst of terms with everybody, even the trees. Do tell him to go back." "Go away, you ugly thing!" said Tyltyl, shaking his fist at the dog. Dear old faithful Tylô, who had come because he suspected the cat's plans, was much hurt by these hard words. He was ready to cry, was still out of breath from running, and could think of nothing to say. "Go away, I tell you," said Tyltyl again. "We don't want you here, and there's an end of it. You're a nuisance, there." The dog was an obedient animal, and, at any other time, he would have gone. But his affection told him what a serious business it was, and he stood stock still. "Do you allow this disobedience?" said the cat to Tyltyl in a whisper. "Hit him with your stick." Tyltyl beat the dog, as the cat suggested. "There! That will teach you to be more obedient," he said. The poor dog howled at receiving the blows, but there was no limit to his self-sacrifice. He went up to his young master pluckily and, taking him in his arms, cried: "I must kiss you now you've beaten me." Tyltyl, who was a good-hearted little fellow, did not know what to do, and the cat swore beneath her teeth like a wild beast. Fortunately, dear little Mytyl interfered on our friend's behalf. "No, no, I want him to stay," she pleaded. "I'm frightened when Tylô's not with us." Time was short, and they had to come to a decision. "I'll find some other way to get rid of the idiot," thought the cat, and, turning to the dog, she said, in her most gracious manner: "We shall be so pleased if you will join us." As they entered the great forest, the children stuck close together, with the cat and the dog on either side of them. They were awed by the silence and the darkness, and they felt much relieved when the cat exclaimed: "Here we are! Turn the diamond!" Then the light spread around them and showed them a wonderful sight. They were standing in the middle of a large round space in the heart of the forest, where all the old, old trees seemed to reach up to the sky. Wide avenues formed a white star amidst the dark green of the wood. Everything was peaceful and still. But suddenly a strange shiver ran through the foliage. The branches moved and stretched like human arms. The roots raised the earth that covered them, came together, took the shapes of legs and feet, and stood on the ground. A tremendous crash rang through the air. The trunks of the trees burst open, and each of them let out its soul, which made its appearance like a funny human figure. Some stepped slowly from their trunks, others came out with a jump, and all of them gathered inquisitively round our friends. The talkative poplar began to chatter like a magpie. "Little men! We shall be able to talk to them. We have done with silence. Where do they come from? Who are they?" And so he rattled on. The lime-tree, who was a jolly fat fellow, came up calmly, smoking his pipe. The conceited and dandified chestnut-tree screwed his glass into his eye to stare at the children. He wore a coat of green silk embroidered with pink and white flowers. He thought the little ones too poor-looking, and turned away in derision. "He thinks he's everybody, since he has taken to living in town. He despises us," sneered the poplar, who was jealous of him. "Oh dear, oh dear!" wept the willow, a wretched little stunted fellow, who came clattering along in a pair of wooden shoes too big for him. "They have come to cut off my head and arms for firewood." Tyltyl could not believe his eyes. He never stopped asking the cat questions. "Who's this? Who's that?" And Tylette introduced the soul of each tree to him. There was the elm, who was a sort of short-winded, paunchy, crabby gnome; the beech, an elegant, sprightly person; the birch, who looked like the ghosts in the palace of Night, with his white flowing garments and his restless gestures. The tallest figure was the fir-tree. Tyltyl found it very difficult to see his face perched right at the top of his long, thin body, but he looked gentle and sad, whereas the cypress, who stood near him, dressed all in black, frightened Tyltyl terribly. However, so far nothing very dreadful had happened. The trees, delighted at being able to talk, were all chattering together, and our young friend was simply going to ask them where the bluebird was hidden, when all of a sudden silence reigned. The trees bowed respectfully and stood aside to make way for an immensely old tree, dressed in a long gown embroidered with moss and lichen. He leaned with one hand on a stick and with the other on a young oak sapling who acted as his guide, for the old oak was blind. His long white beard streamed in the wind. "It's the king," said Tyltyl to himself when he saw his mistletoe crown. "I will ask him the secret of the forest." And he was just going up to him when he stopped, seized with surprise and joy. There sat the bluebird before him, perched on the old oak's shoulder. "He has the bluebird!" cried the boy, gleefully. "Quick, quick! Give him to me!" "Silence! Hold your tongue!" said the greatly shocked trees. "Take off your hat, Tyltyl," said the cat. "It's the oak." The poor child at once obeyed with a smile. He did not understand the danger that threatened him, and he did not hesitate to answer, "Yes, sir," when the oak asked him if he was Tyl the woodcutter's son. Then the oak, trembling with rage, began to lay a terrible charge against Daddy Tyl. "In my family alone," he said, "your father has put to death 600 of my sons, 475 uncles and aunts, 1,200 cousins of both sexes, 380 daughters-in-law, and 12,000 great-grandsons." No doubt his anger made him exaggerate a little, but Tyltyl listened without protest, and said, very politely, "I beg your pardon, sir, for disturbing you. The cat said that you would tell us where the bluebird is." The oak was too old not to know all there was to know about men and animals. He smiled in his beard when he guessed the trap laid by the cat, and he felt very glad at it, for he had long wished to revenge the whole forest for the slavery to which man had subjected it. "It's for the fairy Bérylune's little girl, who is very ill," the boy continued. "Enough!" said the oak, silencing him. I do not hear the animals. Where are they? All this concerns them as much as us. We, the trees, must not assume the responsibility alone for the grave measures that have become necessary. Here they come, said the fir tree, looking over the top of the other trees. They are following the rabbit. I can see the souls of the horse, the bull, the ox, the cow, the wolf, the sheep, the pig, the goat, and the bear. All the animals now arrived. They walked on their hind legs, and were dressed like human beings. They solemnly took up their positions in a circle among the trees, all except the frivolous goat, who began to skip down the avenues, and the pig, who hoped to find some glorious truffles among the roots that had newly left the ground. Are all here present? asked the oak. The hen could not leave her eggs, said the rabbit. The hare was out for a run. The stag has pains in his horns and his corns. The fox is ill. Here is the doctor's certificate. The goose did not understand, and the turkey flew into a passion. Look, whispered Tyltyl to Mytyl. Aren't they funny? They are just like the rich cousin's fine toys in the windows at Christmas time. The rabbit especially made them laugh, with his cocked hat over his big ears, his blue embroidered coat, and his drum slung in front of him. Meanwhile, the oak was explaining the situation to his brothers the trees and to the animals. Treacherous Tylette had been quite right in reckoning on their hatred. The child you see before you, said the oak, thanks to a talisman stolen from the powers of earth, is able to take possession of our bluebird, and thus to snatch from us the secret which we have kept since the origin of life. Now we know enough of man to entertain no doubt as to the fate which he reserves for us once he is in possession of this secret. Any hesitation would be both foolish and criminal. It is a serious moment. The child must be done away with before it is too late. What is he saying? asked Tyltyl, who could not make out what the old tree was driving at. The dog was prowling round the oak, and now showed his fangs. Do you see my teeth, you old cripple? he growled. He is insulting the oak, said the beech indignantly. Drive him out, shouted the oak angrily. He's a traitor. What did I tell you? whispered the cat to Tyltyl. I will arrange things, but send him away. Will you be off? said Tyltyl to the dog. Do let me worry the gouty old beggar's moss slippers, begged Tylô. Tyltyl tried in vain to prevent him. The rage of Tylô, who understood the danger, knew no bounds, and he would have succeeded in saving his master if the cat had not thought of calling in the ivy, who till then had kept his distance. The dog pranced about like a madman, abusing everybody. He railed at the ivy. Come on, if you dare, you old ball of twine, you. The onlookers growled. The oak was pale with fury at seeing his authority denied. The trees and the animals were indignant, but, as they were cowards, not one of them dared protest. And the dog would have settled all of them, if he had gone on with his rebellion. But Tyltyl threatened him harshly, and, suddenly yielding to his docile instincts, Tylô lay down at his master's feet. Thus it is that our finest virtues are treated as faults when we exercise them without discrimination. From that moment the children were lost. The ivy gagged and bound the poor dog, who was then taken behind the chestnut tree and tied to his biggest root. Now, cried the oak, in a voice of thunder, we can take counsel quietly. This is the first time that it is given us to judge man. I do not think that, after the monstrous injustice which we have suffered, there can remain the least doubt as to the sentence that awaits him. One cry rang from every throat: Death! 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 The poor children did not at first understand their doom, for the trees and animals, who were more accustomed to talking their own special language, did not speak very distinctly, and, besides, the innocent children could never imagine such cruelty. "What is the matter with them?" asked the boy. "Are they displeased?" "Don't be alarmed," said the cat. "They are a little annoyed because spring is late." And she went on talking into Tyltyl's ear, to divert his attention from what was happening. While the trusting lad was listening to her fibs, the others were discussing which form of execution would be the most practical and the least dangerous. The bull suggested a good butt with the horns. The beech offered his highest branch to hang the little children on, and the ivy was already preparing a slip knot. The fir tree was willing to give the 4 planks for the coffin, and the cypress the perpetual grant of a tomb. "By far the simplest way," whispered the willow, "would be to drown them in one of my rivers." And the pig grunted between his teeth. "In my opinion, the great thing would be to eat the little girl. She ought to be very tender." "Silence!" roared the oak. "What we have to decide is which of us shall have the honour of striking the first blow." "That honour falls to you, our king," said the fir tree. "Alas, I am too old," replied the oak. "I am blind and infirm. To you, my evergreen brother, be the glory, in my place, of striking the decisive blow that shall set us free." But the fir tree declined the honour on the pretext that he was already to have the pleasure of burying the 2 victims, and that he was afraid of rousing jealousy. He suggested the beech, as owning the best club. "It is out of the question," said the beech. "You know I am worm-eaten. Ask the elm and the cypress." Thereupon the elm began to moan and groan. A mole had twisted his great toe the night before, and he could hardly stand upright, and the cypress excused himself, and so did the poplar, who declared that he was ill and shivering with fever. Then the oak's indignation flared up. "You are afraid of man!" he exclaimed. "Even those unprotected and unarmed little children inspire you with terror. Well, I shall go forth alone, old and shaky and blind as I am, against the hereditary enemy. Where is he?" And groping his way with his stick, he moved towards Tyltyl, growling as he went. Our poor little friend had been very much afraid during the last few minutes. The cat had left him suddenly, saying that she wanted to smooth down the excitement, and had not come back. Mytyl nestled tremblingly against him, and he felt very lonely, very unhappy among those dreadful people whose anger he was beginning to notice. When he saw the oak marching on him with a threatening air, he drew his pocket-knife and defied him like a man. "Is it I he's after, the old one with the big stick?" he cried. But, at the sight of the knife, man's irresistible weapon, all the trees shook with fright and rushed at the oak to hold him back. There was a struggle, and the old king, conquered by the weight of years, threw away his stick. "Shame on us!" he shouted. "Shame on us! Let the animals deliver us!" The animals were only waiting for this. All wanted to be revenged together. Fortunately, their very eagerness caused a scrimmage which delayed the murder of the dear little ones. Mytyl uttered piercing screams. "Don't be afraid," said Tyltyl, doing his best to protect her. "I have my knife." "The little chap means to die game," said the cock. "That's the one I shall eat first," said the pig, eyeing Mytyl greedily. "What have I done to all of you?" asked Tyltyl. "Nothing at all, my little man," said the sheep. "Eaten my little brother, my 2 sisters, my 3 uncles, my aunt, my grandpapa and my grandmamma. Wait, wait, when you're down, you shall see that I have teeth also." And so the sheep and the horse, who were the greatest cowards, waited for the little fellow to be knocked down before they dared to take their share in the spoil. While they were talking, the wolf and the bear treacherously attacked Tyltyl from behind and pushed him over. It was an awful moment. All the animals, seeing him on the ground, tried to get at him. The boy raised himself to one knee and brandished his knife. Mytyl uttered yells of distress, and, to crown all, it suddenly became dark. Tyltyl called wildly for assistance. "Help! Help! Tylô! Tylô! To the rescue! Where's Tylette? Come! Come!" The cat's voice was heard in the distance, where she was craftily keeping out of sight. "I can't come," she whined. "I'm wounded." All this time plucky little Tyltyl was defending himself as best he could, but he was alone against all of them, felt that he was going to be killed and, in a faltering voice, cried once more: "Help! Tylô! Tylô! I can't hold out! There are too many of them! The bear, the pig, the wolf, the fir tree, the birch... Tylô! Tylô! Tylô!" Then the dog came leaping along, dragging his broken bonds and elbowing his way through the trees and animals, and flung himself before his master, whom he defended furiously. "Here, my little god, don't be afraid. Have at them. I know how to use my teeth." All the trees and animals raised a loud outcry. "Renegade! Idiot! Traitor! Felon! Simpleton! Sneak! Leave him! He's a dead man! Come over to us!" The dog fought on. "Never! Never! I alone against all of you! Never! Never! True to the gods, to the best, to the greatest! Take care, my little master! Here's the bear! Look out for the bull!" Tyltyl vainly tried to defend himself. "I'm done for, Tylô! It was a blow from the elm. My hand's bleeding." And he dropped to the ground. "No, I can hold out no longer." "They are coming," said the dog. "I hear somebody. We are saved! It is Light! Saved! Saved! See, they're afraid. They're retreating. Saved, my little king!" And, sure enough, Light was coming towards them, and with her the dawn rose over the forest, which became light as day. "What is it? What has happened?" she asked, quite alarmed at the sight of the little ones and their dear Tylô covered with wounds and bruises. "Why, my poor boy, didn't you know? Turn the diamond quickly!" Tyltyl hastened to obey, and immediately the souls of all the trees rushed back into their trunks, which closed upon them. The souls of the animals also disappeared, and there was nothing to be seen but a cow and a sheep browsing peacefully in the distance. The forest became harmless once more, and Tyltyl looked around him in amazement. "No matter," he said, "but for the dog, and if I hadn't had my knife." Light thought that he had been punished enough, and did not scold him. Besides, she was very much upset by the horrible danger which he had run. Tyltyl, Mytyl, and the dog, glad to meet again safe and sound, exchanged wild kisses. They laughingly counted their wounds, which were not very serious. Tylette was the only one to make a fuss. "The dog's broken my paw," she mewed. Tylô felt as if he could have made a mouthful of her. "Never mind," he said. "It'll keep." "Leave her alone, will you, you ugly beast?" said Mytyl. Our friends went back to the Temple of Light to rest after their adventure. Tyltyl, repenting of his disobedience, dared not even mention the Blue Bird of which he had caught a glimpse, and Light said to the children, gently: "Let this teach you, dears, that man is all alone against all in this world. Never forget that." End of chapter 8.
Chapter 9 of The Blue Bird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eric Metzler. The Blue Bird for Children, by Georgette Leblanc, translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. Chapter 9. The Leave-Taking. Weeks and months had passed since the children's departure on their journey, and the hour of separation was at hand. Light had been very sad lately. She had counted the days in sorrow, without a word to the animals and things, who had no idea of the misfortune that threatened them. On the day when we see them for the last time, they were all out in the gardens of the temple. Light stood watching them from a marble terrace, with Tyltyl and Mytyl sleeping by her side. Much had happened in the past 12 months, but the life of the animals and things, which had no intelligence to guide it, had made no progress. On the contrary, Bread had eaten so much that he was now not able to walk. Milk, devoted as ever, dragged him along in a bath chair. Fire's nasty temper had made him quarrel with everybody, and he had become very lonely and unhappy in consequence. Water, who had no will of her own, had ended by yielding to Sugar's sweet entreaties. They were now married, and Sugar presented a most piteous sight. The poor fellow was reduced to a shadow of his former self, shrank visibly day by day, and was sillier than ever, while Water, in marrying, had lost her principal charm, her simplicity. The cat had remained the liar that she always was, and our dear friend Tylô had never been able to overcome his hatred for her. Poor things, thought Light with a sigh, they have not gained much by receiving the benefit of life. They have travelled and seen nothing of all the wonders that surrounded them in my peaceful temple. They were either quarrelling with one another or overeating themselves until they fell ill. They were too foolish to enjoy their happiness, and they will recognize it for the first time presently, when they are about to lose it. At that moment a pretty dove with silver wings alighted on her knees. It wore an emerald collar round its neck, with a note fastened to the clasp. The dove was the fairy Bérylune's messenger. Light opened the letter and read these few words: "Remember that the year is over." Then Light stood up, waved her wand, and everything disappeared from sight. A few seconds later, the whole company were gathered together outside a high wall with a small door in it. The first rays of the dawn were gilding the tree-tops. Tyltyl and Mytyl, whom Light was fondly supporting with her arms, woke up, rubbed their eyes, and looked around them in astonishment. "What?" said Light to Tyltyl. "Don't you remember that wall and that little door?" The sleepy boy shook his head. He remembered nothing. Then Light assisted his memory. "The wall," she said, "surrounds a house which we left one evening just a year ago today." "Just a year ago? Why then—" And, clapping his hands with glee, Tyltyl ran to the door. "We must be near Mummy. I want to kiss her at once, at once, at once." But Light stopped him. It was too early, she said. Mummy and Daddy were still asleep, and he must not wake them with a start. "Besides," she added, "the door will not open till the hour strikes." "What hour?" asked the boy. "The hour of separation," Light answered, sadly. "What?" said Tyltyl, in great distress. "Are you leaving us?" "I must," said Light. "The year is past. The fairy will come back and ask you for the blue bird." "But I haven't got the blue bird," cried Tyltyl. "The one of the land of memory turned quite black. The one of the future flew away. The nights are dead. Those in the graveyard were not blue, and I could not catch the one in the forest. Will the fairy be angry? What will she say?" "Never mind, dear," said Light. "You did your best, and though you did not find the bluebird, you deserved to do so, for the good will, pluck, and courage which you showed." Light's face beamed with happiness as she spoke these words, for she knew that to deserve to find the bluebird was very much the same thing as finding it. But she was not allowed to say this, for it was a beautiful mystery, which Tyltyl had to solve for himself. She turned to the animals and things, who stood weeping in a corner, and told them to come and kiss the children. Bread at once put down the cage at Tyltyl's feet and began to make a speech. "In the name of all, I crave permission." "You shan't have mine," cried Fire. "Order!" cried Water. "We still have tongues of our own," roared Fire. "Yes, yes!" screamed Sugar, who, knowing that his end was at hand, kept kissing Water and melting before the other's eyes. Poor Bread in vain tried to make his voice heard above the din. Light had to interfere and command silence. Then Bread spoke his last words. "I am leaving you," he said between his sobs. "I am leaving you, my dear children, and you will no longer see me in my living form. Your eyes are about to close to the invisible life of things, but I shall be always there, in the bread pan, on the shelf, on the table, beside the soup, I who am, if I may say so, the most faithful companion, the oldest friend of man." "Well, and what about me?" shouted Fire angrily. "Silence!" said Light. "The hour is passing. Be quick and say good-bye to the children." Fire rushed forward, took hold of the children, one after the other, and kissed them so violently that they screamed with pain. "Oh, oh, he's burning me! Oh, oh, he's scorched my nose!" "Let me kiss the place and make it well," said Water, going up to the children gently. This gave Fire his chance. "Take care," he said, "you'll get wet." "I'm loving and gentle," said Water. "I'm kind to human beings." "What about those you drown?" asked Fire. But Water pretended not to hear. "Love the wells, listen to the brooks," she said. "I shall always be there. When you sit down in the evening, beside the springs, try to understand what they are trying to say." Then she had to break off, for a regular waterfall of tears came gushing from her eyes, flooding all around her. However, she resumed. "Think of me when you see the water bottle. You will find me also in the ewer, the watering can, the cistern and the tap." Then Sugar came up with a limping walk, for he could hardly stand on his feet. He uttered a few words of sorrow in an affected voice and then stopped, for tears, he said, were not in harmony with his temperament. "Humbug!" cried Bread. "Sugar plum, lollipop, caramel!" yelped Fire. And all began to laugh except the two children, who were very sad. "Where are Tylette and Tylô gone to?" asked our hero. At that moment the Cat came running up, in a terrible state. Her hair was on end and dishevelled, her clothes were torn, and she was holding a handkerchief to her cheek, as though she had the toothache. She uttered terrible groans, and was closely pursued by the dog, who overwhelmed her with bites, blows, and kicks. The others rushed in between them to separate them, but the two enemies continued to insult and glare at each other. The Cat accused the dog of pulling her tail, and putting tin tacks in her food, and beating her. The dog simply growled and denied none of his actions. "You've had some," he kept saying. "You've had some, and you're going to have some more." But suddenly he stopped, and, as he was panting with excitement, it could be seen that his tongue turned quite white. Light had told him to kiss the children for the last time. "For the last time?" stammered poor Tylô. "Are we to part from these poor children?" His grief was such that he was incapable of understanding anything. "Yes," said Light, "the hour which you know of is at hand. We are going to return to silence." Thereupon the dog, suddenly realizing his misfortune, began to utter real howls of despair and fling himself upon the children, whom he loaded with mad and violent caresses. "No, no," he cried. "I refuse, I refuse. I shall always talk, and I shall be very good. You will keep me with you, and I will learn to read and write and play dominoes. And I shall always be very clean, and I shall never steal anything in the kitchen again." He went on his knees before the two children, sobbing and entreating, and when Tyltyl, with his eyes full of tears, remained silent, dear Tylô had a last magnificent idea. Running up to the Cat, he offered with smiles that looked like grins to kiss her. Tylette, who did not possess his spirit of self-sacrifice, leaped back and took refuge by Mytyl's side. Then Mytyl said innocently, "You, Tylette, are the only one that hasn't kissed us yet." The Cat put on a mincing tone. "Children," said she, "I love you both as much as you deserve." There was a pause. "And now," said Light, "let me, in my turn, give you a last kiss." As she spoke, she spread her veil round them as if she would have wrapped them for the last time in her luminous might. Then she gave them each a long and loving kiss. Tyltyl and Mytyl hung on to her beseechingly. "No, no, no, Light!" they cried. "Stay here with us. Daddy won't mind. We will tell Mummy how kind you have been. Where will you go all alone?" "Not very far, my children," said Light. "Over there to the land of the Silence of Things." "No, no," said Tyltyl. "I won't have you go." But Light quieted them with a motherly gesture and said words to them which they never forgot. Long after, when they were a grandfather and grandmother in their turn, Tyltyl and Mytyl still remembered them and used to repeat them to their grandchildren. Here are Light's touching words. "Listen, Tyltyl. Do not forget, child, that everything that you see in this world has neither beginning nor end. If you keep this thought in your heart and let it grow up with you, you will always, in all circumstances, know what to say, what to do, and what to hope for." And when our two friends began to sob, she added lovingly, "Do not cry, my dear ones. I have not a voice like water. I have only my brightness, which man does not understand. But I watch over him to the end of his days. Never forget that I am speaking to you in every spreading moonbeam, in every twinkling star, in every dawn that rises, in every lamp that is lit, in every good and bright thought of your soul." At that moment, the grandfather's clock in the cottage struck 8 o'clock. Light stopped for a moment, and then, in a voice that grew suddenly fainter, whispered, "Good-bye, good-bye. The hour is striking. Good-bye." Her veil faded away. Her smile became paler. Her eyes closed. Her form vanished, and, through their tears, the children saw nothing but a thin ray of light dying away at their feet. Then they turned to the others, but these had disappeared. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Eric Metzler, Albuquerque, New Mexico, United States of America.
Chapter 10 of The Blue Bird for Children. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Karine Pereira. The Blue Bird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos. The Awakening. The grandfather's clock in Till, the woodcutter's cottage, had struck 8, and his two little children, Tyltyl and Mytyl, were still asleep in their little beds. Mummy Till stood looking at them, with her arms akimbo and her apron tucked up, laughing and scolding in the same breath. "I can't let them go on sleeping till midday," she said. "Come, get up, you little lazybones." But it was no use shaking them, kissing them, or pulling the bedclothes off them. They kept on falling back upon their pillows, with their noses pointing at the ceiling, their mouths wide open, their eyes shut, and their cheeks all pink. At last, after receiving a gentle thump in the ribs, Tyltyl opened one eye and murmured: "What, Light? Where are you? No, no, don't go away." "Light!" cried Mummy Till, laughing. "Why, of course it's Light. Has been for ever so long. What's the matter with you? You look quite blinded." "Mummy, Mummy," said Tyltyl, rubbing his eyes, "it's you." "Why, of course it's I. Why do you stare at me in that way? Is my nose turned upside down, by any chance?" Tyltyl was quite awake by this time, and did not trouble to answer the question. He was beside himself with delight. It was ages and ages since he had seen his mummy, and he never tired of kissing her. Mummy Till began to be uneasy. What could the matter be? Had her boy lost his senses? Here he was suddenly talking of a long journey in the company of the fairy and water and milk and sugar and fire and bread and light. He made believe that he had been away a year. "But you haven't left the room," cried Mummy Till, who was now nearly beside herself with fright. "I put you to bed last night, and here you are this morning. It's Christmas Day. Don't you hear the bells in the village?" "Of course, it's Christmas Day," said Tyltyl obstinately, "seeing that I went away a year ago on Christmas Eve. You're not angry with me? Did you feel very sad? And what did Daddy say?" "Come, you're still asleep," said Mummy Till, trying to take comfort. "You've been dreaming. Get up and put on your breeches and your little jacket." "Hello, I've got my shirt on," said Tyltyl. And, leaping up, he knelt down on the bed and began to dress, while his mother kept on looking at him with a scared face. The little boy rattled on. "Ask me, Till, if you don't believe me. Oh, we have had such adventures! We saw Grandad and Granny, yes, in the land of memory. It was on our way. They are dead, but they are quite well, aren't they, Mytyl?" And Mytyl, who was now beginning to wake up, joined her brother in describing their visit to the grandparents and the fun which they had had with their little brothers and sisters. This was too much for Mummy Till. She ran to the door of the cottage and called with all her might to her husband, who was working on the edge of the forest. "Oh dear," she cried. "I shall lose them as I lost the others. Do come quick!" Daddy Till soon entered the cottage, with his axe in his hand. He listened to his wife's lamentations, while the two children told the story of their adventures over again and asked him what he had done during the year. You see," said Mummy Till, crying. "They have lost their heads. Something will happen to them. Run and fetch the doctor." But the woodcutter was not the man to put himself out for such a trifle. He kissed the little ones, calmly lit his pipe and declared that they looked very well and that there was no hurry. At that moment there came a knock at the door and a neighbour walked in. She was a little old woman leaning on a stick and very much like the fairy Berylune. The children at once flung their arms around her neck and capered round her, shouting merrily, "It's the fairy Berylune!" The neighbour, who was a little hard of hearing, paid no attention to their cries and said to Mummy Till, "I have come to ask for a bit of fire for my Christmas stew. It's very chilly this morning. Good morning, children." Meanwhile, Tyltyl had become a little thoughtful. No doubt, he was glad to see the old fairy again. But what would she say when she heard that he had not the blue bird? He made up his mind like a man and went up to her boldly. "Fairy Berylune, I could not find the blue bird." "What is he saying?" asked the neighbour, quite taken aback. Thereupon Mummy Till began to fret again. "Come, Tyltyl, don't you know Goody Berlingot?" "Why, yes, of course," said Tyltyl, looking the neighbour up and down. "It's the fairy Berylune." "Berry what?" asked the neighbour. "Berylune," answered Tyltyl calmly. "Berlingot," said the neighbour. "You mean Berlingot." Tyltyl was a little put out by her positive way of talking, and he answered, "Berylune or Berlingot, as you please, ma'am, but I know what I'm saying." Daddy Till was beginning to have enough of it. "We must put a stop to this," he said. "I will give them a smack or two." "Don't," said the neighbour. "It's not worth while. It's only a little fit of dreaming. They must have been sleeping in the moonbeams. My little girl who is very ill is often like that." Mummy Till put aside her own anxiety for a moment and asked after the health of the neighbour Berlingot's little girl. "She's only so," said the neighbour, shaking her head. "She can't get up. The doctor says it's her nerves. I know what would cure her, for all that. She was asking me for it only this morning for a Christmas present." She hesitated a little, looked at Tyltyl with a sigh and added, in a disheartened tone, "What can I do? It's a fancy she has." The others looked at one another in silence. They knew what the neighbour's words meant. Her little girl had long been saying that she would get well if Tyltyl would only give her his dove. But he was so fond of it that he refused to part with it. "Well," said Mummy Till to her son, Won't you give your bird to that poor little thing? She has been dying to have it for ever so long." "My bird!" cried Tyltyl, slapping his forehead as though they had spoken of something quite out of the way. "My bird!" he repeated. "That's true, I was forgetting about him. And the cage! Mytyl, do you see the cage? It's the one which Brett carried. Yes, it's the same one, there it is! It's the blue bird we were looking for. We have been miles and miles and miles, and he was here all the time." Tyltyl would not believe his eyes. He took a chair, put it under the cage and climbed onto it gaily, saying, "Of course, I'll give him to her, of course I will." Then he stopped, in amazement. "Why, he's blue!" he said. "It's my dove, just the same, but he has turned blue while I was away." And our hero jumped down from the chair and began to skip for joy, crying, "It's the blue bird we were looking for. We have been miles and miles and miles, and he was here all the time. He was here at home. Oh, but how wonderful! Mytyl, do you see the bird? What would Light say? There, Madame Berlingot, take him quickly to your little girl." While he was talking, Mummy Tyl threw herself into her husband's arms and moaned, You see, he's taken bad again, he's wandering." Meantime, neighbour Berlingot beamed all over her face, clasped her hands together and mumbled her thanks. When Tyltyl gave her the bird, she could hardly believe her eyes. She hugged the boy in her arms and wept with joy and gratitude. "Do you give it me?" she kept saying. "Do you give it me like that, straight away and for nothing? Goodness, how happy she will be! I fly! I will come back to tell you what she says." Yes, go quickly," said Tyltyl, "for some of them change their colour." Neighbour Berlingot ran out and Tyltyl shut the door after her. Then he returned round on the threshold, looked at the walls of the cottage, looked all around him and seemed wonder-struck. "Daddy, Mummy, what have you done to the house?" he asked. "It's just as it was, but it's much prettier." His parents looked at each other in bewilderment, and the little boy went on. "Why, yes, everything has been painted and made to look like new. Everything is clean and polished. And look at the forest outside the window. How big and fine it is! One would think it was quite new. How happy I feel here! Oh, how happy I feel!" The worthy woodcutter and his wife could not make out what was coming over their son. But you, my dear little readers, who have followed Tyltyl and Mytyl through their beautiful dream, will have guessed what it was that altered everything in our young hero's view. It was not for nothing that the fairy, in his dream, had given him a talisman to open his eyes. He had learned to see the beauty of things around him. He had passed through trials that had developed his courage. While pursuing the blue bird, the bird of happiness that was to bring happiness to the fairy's little girl, he had become open-handed and so good-natured that the mere thought of giving pleasure to others filled his heart with joy. And, while travelling through endless, wonderful, imaginary regions, his mind had opened out to life. The boy was right when he thought everything more beautiful, for, to his richer and purer understanding, everything must needs seem infinitely fairer than before. Meanwhile, Tyltyl continued his joyful inspection of the cottage. He leaned over the bread pan to speak a kind word of the loaves. He rushed at Tylô, who was sleeping in his basket, and congratulated him on the good fight which he had made in the forest. Mytyl stooped down to stroke Tylette, who was snoozing by the stove, and said, "Well, Tylette, you know me, I see, but you have stopped talking." Then Tyltyl put his hand up to his forehead. "Hello!" he cried. "The diamond's gone! Who's taken my little green hat? Never mind, I don't want it any more. Ah, there's fire! Good morning, sir. He'll be crackling to make Water angry." He ran to the tap, turned it on and bent down over the water. "Good morning, Water, good morning. What does she say? She still talks, but I don't understand her as well as I did. Oh, how happy I am!" How happy I am!" "So am I! So am I!" cried Mytyl. And our two young friends took each other's hands and began to scamper round the kitchen. Mummy Tyl felt a little relieved at seeing them so full of life and spirits. Besides, Daddy Tyl was so calm and placid. He sat eating his porridge and laughing. "You see, they are playing at being happy," he said. Of course, the poor dim man did not know that a wonderful dream had taught his little children not to play at being happy, but to be happy, which is the greatest and most difficult of lessons. "I like light best of all," said Tyltyl to Mytyl, standing on tiptoe by the window. "You can see her over there through the trees of the forest. Tonight she will be in the lamp. Dear, oh dear, how lovely it all is and how glad I feel. How glad I..." He stopped and listened. Everybody lent an ear. They heard laughter and merry voices, and the sounds came nearer. "It's her voice!" cried Tyltyl. "Let me open the door." As a matter of fact, it was the little girl, with her mother, neighbor Berlingot. "Look at her!" said Goody Berlingot, quite overcome with joy. "She can run, she can dance, she can fly! It's a miracle! When she saw the bird, she jumped just like that!" And Goody Berlingot hopped from one leg to the other, at the risk of falling and breaking a long, hooked nose. The children clapped their hands and everybody laughed. The little girl was there, in a long white night dress, standing in the middle of the kitchen, a little surprised to find herself on her feet after so many months' illness. She smiled and pressed Tyltyl's dove to her heart. Tyltyl looked first at the child and then at Mytyl. "Don't you think she's very like light?" he asked. "She is much smaller," said Mytyl. "Yes, indeed," said Tyltyl, "but she will grow." And the three children tried to put a little food down the bird's beak, while the parents began to feel easier in their minds and looked at them and smiled. Tyltyl was radiant. I will not conceal from you, my dear little readers, that the dove had hardly changed colour at all, and that it was joy and happiness that decked him with a magnificent bright blue plumage in our hero's eyes. No matter. Tyltyl, without knowing it, had discovered Light's great secret, which is that we draw nearer to happiness by trying to give it to others. But now something happened. Everybody became excited. The children screamed. The parents threw up their arms and rushed to the open door. The bird had suddenly escaped. He was flying away as fast as he could. My bird!" sobbed the little girl. But Tyltyl was the first to run to the staircase, and he returned in triumph. "It's all right," he said. "Don't cry. He's still in the house and we shall find him again." And he gave a kiss to the little girl, who was already smiling through her tears. "You'll be sure to catch him again, won't you?" she asked. "Trust me," replied our friend, confidentially. "I know where he is." You also, my dear little readers, now know where the bluebird is. Dear Light revealed nothing to the woodcutter's children, but she showed them the road to happiness by teaching them to be good and kind and generous. Suppose that, at the beginning of this story, she had said to them, "Go straight back home. The bluebird is there, in the humble cottage, in the wicker cage, with your dear father and mother who love you." The children would never have believed her. "What?" Tyltyl would have answered. "The bluebird, my dove? Nonsense! My dove is grey. Happiness in the cottage, with Daddy and Mummy. Oh, I say! There are no toys at home and it's awfully boring there. We want to go ever so far and meet with tremendous adventures and have all sorts of fun." That is what he would have said. And he and Mytyl would have set out in spite of everything, without listening to Light's advice, for the most certain truths are good for nothing if we do not put them to the test ourselves. It only takes a moment to tell a child all the wisdom in the world. but our whole lives are not long enough to help us understand it, because our own experience is our only light. Each of us must seek out happiness for himself, and he has to take endless pains and undergo many a cruel disappointment before he learns to become happy by appreciating the simple and perfect pleasures that are always within easy reach of his mind and heart. The end. End of The Awakening. Recording by Karina Pereira. End of The Bluebird for Children by Georgette Leblanc. Translated by Alexander Teixeira de Matos.